Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of What If Naruto was a Sensory-Nin and became the head of Root. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 13. Hinata was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the conversation Sakura and Ino were having right behind her. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but it also didn't seem like they cared if she heard or not, either. At first they started talking about the things they liked about Sasuke. They both admired him and Hinata had her own hero, so she wasn't going to complain if they talked about their hero. She was content at first to let them continue as she sat and watched their classmates spar. It was a wonderful day after all. Then they moved on to talking about other boys in their class as Iruka-sensei called for others to spar. She tried to ignore them and focus on her classmates' fights, but realized they were becoming meaner and meaner with what they were talking about. That continued for a while and then they started talking about Sai. I just think Sai is weird. Yeah, it's like he doesn't know how to be nice. Or polite. I think a jutsu went wrong when he was a baby and now he can't feel anymore. He's just a loser. Nothing like. Stop it. They were both surprised when she turned around to frown at them. Hinata. He's my friend and I don't like how you're both talking about him. She turned back around quickly, her face fully flushed. She felt very warm and uncomfortable, like she was about to sweat any minute now. She couldn't even take off her jacket because then she'd just feel too exposed. She was overwhelmed. I can't believe I just said that. She felt proud for defending her friend and guilty for being a little mean to Sakura and Ino. Hopefully they'd both understand she was just sticking up for a friend and forgive her. She decided to just pretend they weren't staring at her, just pretend she hadn't said anything and go back to watching the fights. Kiba was currently fighting Choji and it was a very close fight. Without Akamaru, Kiba's style was at a disadvantage and yet. Thinks she can't tell he's creepy cause he's nice to her. She doesn't have many friends, so he's probably just taking advantage of her loneliness. Hinata shot up to her feet and leveled an uncharacteristically expressive frown at the two girls. She could tell they didn't think she could hear them, with them whispering slightly quieter than earlier. They seemed sheepish but not remorseful. Saying such mean things about Sai and her. Like she was some weak-willed girl who had no friends. She could see it in their eyes even now, having gotten her angry, they weren't worried. Maybe a bit guilty, but they believed she wouldn't do anything. Wouldn't say anything. Do anything even though they were bad talking her friend. Was she going to do anything? Hinata-san. Is something wrong? Iruka asked as he walked up to them, having concluded the spar between Kiba and Choji. She spun around. I want to spar Ino-san, Iruka-sensei. All talking ceased and even Iruka seemed shocked at her behavior. She felt another blush creeping up her cheeks and tried to fight it off with everything she had. Everyone's eyes were on her, and she didn't even want to think what they were thinking about her. Please. Oh okay. Ino-san. Would you like to spar against Hinata? Sure, Iruka-sensei. Sounds fun. Whispers broke out among their classmates as Hinata marched towards her starting position. Ino smiled awkwardly from her position and took a ready position. What was she thinking? She couldn't beat Ino. She had been so angry, but as always, as soon as she had time to think, her anger would be drowned by her insecurity. Was this too much? Was she just going to make an embarrassment of her? What would Sai think if she had issued such a challenge just to lose miserably? But it was too late now. If she tried to back out of the spar after requesting it, Iruka-sensei would be disappointed in her and the other students would just laugh at her. And on top of that, Ino would just go back to talking badly about Sai. She had to fight, she just didn't know if she could. Hinata. Ino. Ready. Sure am. Sensei. Hinata steeled her nerves with a deep breath and tried to mask her stutter, speaking slowly. Hi sensei. I'm ready. Begin. Hinata watched as Ino charged towards her. No strategy. No deceit. Just a straightforward charge to attack. It was in this moment, as Ino neared her with a readied fist, that she realized it wouldn't take anything more to beat her. She was a Hyuga, a supposed monster of taijutsu, and she couldn't even stop her hands from shaking enough to enter her ready position. Her father was right, she was such a disappointment. Ino reached her and swung. Hinata was able to sidestep it and retaliated, but even she could tell there wasn't any fire in her punches. Her strikes were hesitating and weak. She doubted they'd even bruise. Ino didn't seem to care and didn't even try to dodge or deflect. She got up close and slammed an elbow into Hinata's throat. Hinata gasped, and started to tear up, and before she had gotten her breath back, Ino slipped a leg behind hers and tripped her. She slammed down onto the ground and coughed as she tried to get air to her lungs. She heard her classmates cheering for Ino, and through her blurred vision she saw Sai looking at her. He wasn't upset. He nodded to her and then he mouthed some words. Get up. Keep going. She looked up and saw Ino waving at Sasuke, happy as could be. Any other day, Hinata would have conceded defeat. She would have whimpered on the ground, cried in shame and her own self-pity. Sai wasn't disappointed though. He didn't think she was done. Get up. Could she? She never had before. Keep going. Did it matter? She wouldn't win. It was impossible. But maybe it wasn't about winning. Maybe it was about doing everything she could, like how someone her own age had done everything he could to save her. He'd get up, he would definitely keep going. The boy with blonde hair and kind blue eyes who had saved her life so long ago. Get up. Keep going. She blinked away her tears. She paid no attention to Iruka walking towards her or the classmates that were cheering. She was so focused as she channeled her willpower, that she missed Sai's smile at her. Ino was laughing at something and still had her back to Hinata. Hinata got up. Hinata, ow. She slammed into Ino and slammed her fists against her as fast as she could. There was no form, no technique or style. She kept repeating in her head, keep going. And that's what she did. Hit after hit, and Ino had screamed initially but began hitting back. Hinata felt her resolve wavering in face of the continued fight and so became more desperate, her hands striking out like claws and scratching into Ino. Ow. Hinata. Stop it. She paused as Ino jerked back from her, and before she could even open her mouth to apologize, Ino dashed forward once again and slammed her onto the ground. Girls. Enough. Before anything else could happen, Iruka was suddenly there and Hinata was being lifted to her feet. She was beaten and bruised, covered in dirt, and once again she was tearing up. Sensei, she just. Enough. Ino. I want to talk to you both after class, understand? Ino scoffed and rolled her eyes and Hinata meekly nodded. She went back to her seat, and once more she could hear Ino and Sakura whispering behind her. She pulled up her hood and pulled her knees up to her chest. She rested her face on her arms, hiding it from view. She was sure everyone knew she was crying though. Sasuke watched as Sai hit the dirt before him and he heard Iruka proclaim him the victor. Most of the time, he was left with a small amount of pride in beating every last one of his classmates, but now that he knew the truth, he just felt bitter. He knew Sai's secret. Sai was stronger than him. Not only that, but he was strong enough to fool Iruka into thinking that he was weak. He heard cheering, most notably from Ino and Sakura, and his pride twisted and turned like a stuck eel in his gut. Sai looked worse than the Hyuga girl had earlier, Hinata. He was surprised when she got up and went after Ino so viciously, it was quite unlike her. Of course, she hung out with Sai quite often, so perhaps the boy saw something in her. He had said he saw something in Sasuke, so it could be that he wasn't just training him. That annoyed him even more. He locked eyes with Sai and held out a hand to pick him up. He watched as Sai blinked and grabbed his hand. He pulled him up, and in the second where they were close he whispered to him. I want to train more often. After classes. Sai gave him an indecipherable look, but nodded. Iruka congratulated them both on their fights and they went back to the stands. Sasuke sat off by himself, but he watched as Sai sat beside the crying Hinata. He leaned in towards her and seemed to whisper to her. After a minute or so, she sat back up and wiped the tears from her face and seemed to whisper back to him. Sai nodded, and he watched as they both began to have a conversation. Some part of him wished he had a friend to talk to, but no one here would help him avenge his father. He was still unsure if Sai would even be up to the challenges he'd face. Time seemed to creep along slowly, as it always did day in and day out since his own brother massacred their family. Even now, after being subjected to meeting with a holier-than-thou therapist, he still couldn't understand how Itachi had turned out to be so bad. His therapist said he was left with severe trust issues, but how could he trust strangers over his own family? The one thing you were always supposed to count on were family. His brother taught him how weak bonds really left you. Sasuke never used to cry before, and now every night he woke up sobbing. That's the prize he earned for loving his family, the curse of caring. After an excruciatingly short amount of time that seemed to last forever, class was dismissed. Ino and Hinata walked up towards Iruka, and Sai gave Hinata what appeared to be some words of comfort, before he headed out of the school into the street. Sasuke followed. He knew the route that they'd take to the training ground closest to the Uchiha compound, and yet Sai diverted from the usual course, and Sasuke had no choice but to follow him. What should have been a 10-minute walk turned into nearly half an hour as the two crossed nearly a fourth of the village and arrived at a totally different training ground. Sasuke walked up to him and dropped down his backpack and gave the training ground a once-over. It seemed pretty abandoned, the grass growing wild and filled with shrubs. Some training ground. Looks abandoned. 28. Openings you left in our sparring match earlier. Your form is imperfect until you awaken your Sharingan, if you ever do, that is. I suggest supplementing your taijutsu with another style until then. Sasuke grit his teeth and held in a scathing remark. Nothing he said would affect Sai. The boy was immune to taunts or insults. He didn't care what Sasuke said, and somehow that was extra infuriating. The academy style is clearly inferior. I never mentioned the academy style. Sasuke clenched his teeth again. It was so hard not to be biting with Sai. Then, what do you suggest? Sai hummed in thought and shrugged. It depends on how you want to progress. What are your goals as a shinobi? Sasuke almost scoffed. He was tired of adults and senseis asking that of him. Sai, though, was different from everyone else. Sasuke didn't fully understand him, but he knew he was always serious. He'd want an answer, and if he didn't get one, there'd be no training. I want to restore my clan to prominence and bring my brother to justice. Justice? Do you want to end him? Sasuke glared and sniffed. If he resists, my mom would want him to be on trial, I'm sure. So, justice. I can live if he rots behind bars. Sai tilted his head in thought, and Sasuke slowly realized that answer mattered to him a great deal. Where are your strengths as a shinobi? Ninjutsu, taijutsu, and possibly genjutsu when I get my Sharingan. If you get your Sharingan. When? If. You don't know for sure if you will ever awaken it. Therefore, you can't plan as if you will have it. That's simply unrealistic and foolish. Fine. If I get the Sharingan, which is incredibly likely, I should be fairly rounded off. Uchiha are superb shinobi with vast chakra pools. Most Uchiha who reach Jonin are, yes. I will easily achieve Jonin. Sai gave him a smile that set his blood on fire. It will be one of the hardest journeys you have ever undertaken. Your brother was only slightly older than you are now when he achieved Jonin. I will surpass. If you do, it will be quite the achievement. I can give you the training you seek to excel over your fellow classmates, but you will still be far from the level of skill your brother found himself at naturally. Sasuke frowned. Could you beat him? No. Then how is your training going to make any difference? My brother was one of the strongest shinobi of the village, if not the strongest. Sai gave him another smile, and Sasuke desperately struggled not to snarl at him. He hated how condescending Sai could be. Think back, Sasuke. There is one shinobi who was able to fight your brother off, or don't you remember? Sasuke was suddenly bombarded with flashbacks to that night. The smoke, the fire, the blood. His mother's sobs, his father's screams. His brother's twisted eyes. The lone Anbu agent, younger than he was, who appeared to defend them from the pride of the Uchiha. The pitched battle the two engaged in. Itachi cutting his opponent's hands in two and the Anbu slowly regrowing them mid-battle to keep on fighting. That was power true and terrible. The might to stand up to the paragon of the Uchiha. Remarks the two had made to each other resurfaced long buried under the trauma of the night he lost his father. Of course he would send you, Konoha, you're the only one who would have a chance to stop me. Itachi Uchiha, you are charged with treason, murder, and crimes against a founding clan of Konoha. Surrender. Sasuke's eyes widened. Itachi himself declared them equals. If this shinobi, this supposed Konoha, was still in the village, he'd be able to train Sasuke to his brother's level. He'd be the only one who could help him match his brother's might. I see you remember. Good. Agent Konoha is the only one who can get you what you wish. Your chance for justice. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Then why am I wasting my time with you? Until I think you're ready for it, and not a waste of his time, you'll just have to be content to remain in class. If you can't follow those simple instructions, you'll lose even my own teachings. Fine. If this is what it takes, just don't hold back. Sai smiled and nodded his head. I won't. And this, Agent Konoha, is truly as strong as Itachi. He is one of the strongest shinobi I know of. Now then, if the academy style isn't up to your standards, perhaps the Willow style will be suitable. You'll need to be quite flexible, you better start stretching. Naruto gulped as he ducked the spray of corrosive mist Mei fired off at one of the Kiri loyalists. She was a brutal killer. Looks and pleasant personality aside, on the battlefield she was terrifying. There was an aspect of melting your enemies that was intrinsically intimidating to sentient life, especially when it was slow. Some of the shinobi were left screaming long after their arms had melted down to the bone. Mei at first had held back, but after realizing that Naruto could sense how she was going to attack and made sure to give her room, she returned to laying down heavy fire. The lava release and the boil release were terrible to behold. Naruto was a constant blur of movement. He darted around the battlefield, focusing his efforts around Mei's blind spots. They were constantly turning in sync with each other, and Naruto wasn't giving the enemy any time to retaliate. The monkey claw stance had him almost dancing through the sparse trees while heavily relying on the trunks to redirect his momentum. He and Mei formed something of a whirlpool. Once an enemy entered Naruto's range, they were quickly sucked up into Mei's crosshairs. C1, C2, C3. Switch to shuriken bursts at 1, 7, and 9. Guy called out to the three clones currently hanging on for dear life. The noble green beast of Konoha had seemingly given the clones their own monikers, and a few seconds after his command, 3 different hails of shurikens sailed through the air and cut off the escape of Guy's current foes. They had no idea of how to handle Guy's use of the clones. Naruto watched as Guy kicked out at an enemy only for the clone on the leg, C2, to grab the shinobi by the throat. Guy leapt up and kicked down, and the clone let go of his grappled foe at the kick, sending the hapless Kiri-nin into a crater in the dirt. No one seemed prepared on how to handle it. Guy was twisting, juking, and flying through a crowd of shinobi like a storm. His kicks could turn out to be grapples, his punches could turn into sliced necks by kunai. It was nearly impossible to predict what he and the clones were planning. Naruto was quite proud of it. He idly wondered if Guy could make shadow clones himself. Even if he could only make like 2, that'd be 9 clones on the 3 taijutsu masters. It'd be insanity. Zabuza was cleaving through his foes, and Ao was aiding him. The battle lasted all of 6 minutes. When the last of the loyalists laid melting in the mud, Mei glanced over to Guy, who was congratulating the 3 clones and giving them notes before turning back to him. Is it normal for him to treat your clones as people? It makes it easier for my allies if they believe they are sentient. She nodded and seemed to take him at his word. The last thing they needed was for other villages to know about the usefulness of the shadow clone technique. The rebels were bad enough having a Byakugan. Last thing they needed was a jutsu handcrafted by the Nadaime Hokage. Wrap up, we need to get to Tiru village as soon as possible. If the loyalists had an ambush set up, then Yagura is on to our plans. We must hurry, we need to strike as soon as we can. Zabuza lead the way. Ao and Konoha, on my sides, Guy carry the rear. Let's go. She effortlessly took command of the group and they immediately followed to obey her orders. Just like that, in a span of minutes, 35 bodies were left in the middle of the forest. Naruto knew there would be more bodies soon enough. It seemed Mei didn't want to draw this out any longer than necessary. They'd strike Kiri soon and he'd be able to save Yagura and Isobu from this war. Hiruzen hadn't told him that Yagura was a Jinchuriki, but Mei hadn't told Hiruzen that she knew Yagura was under a very powerful genjutsu and suspected the Uchiha to be responsible. If he could break that genjutsu, then he might be able to talk some sense into Yagura and get him to flee. No matter what, if Yagura stayed in Kiri he would die. It was now or never. For the rebels to retake their home. And for him to save his brother in arms. He's done terrible things. Naruto, the genjutsu may not have forced him to commit them either. Then at the very least, we save Isobu, Kurama-kun. We don't have a choice. This is our one chance, we have to make it count. Clan heads were granted many luxuries and privileges for their loyalty and service of their clans for the good of Konoha. There had always been rivalries and political maneuvering between the clans. Even clans such as the Nara, Akamichi, and the Yamanaka had disputes among themselves. Should a dispute ever near the point of violence, the Hokage would step in and their decision would be the final word on the issue. The Uchiha had forgotten that lesson, and Danzo had taken it upon himself to humble them once more. The problem with the system was when a clan head had a dispute with the Hokage. As Inoichi clearly had when he walked into his office with Kakashi in tow. Inoichi-san, how may I help? Inoichi marched straight up to his desk and slapped a folder on his desk. He idly took it into his hands and withheld the urge to raise an eyebrow when he realized it was Agent Konoha's official folder. He glanced back to Inoichi, who was glaring as if he'd been personally insulted in front of another clan head. Page 2. Paragraph 1. Hokage-sama. He opened the folder and felt surprise wash over him. It had been quite some time since he had been caught unawares, largely thanks in part to Naruto's assistance, but this. It's a forgery, Inoichi-san. The blood report supports it. They're from two separate sources. Unless you are claiming that both are forgeries. They are. I personally guarantee you that Agent Konoha is not a Yamanaka. Inoichi was usually pretty amicable, and yet he could see that the man was incensed. Do you have any proof of your claim, Hokage-sama? Hiruzen had a couple of options. He could outright deny it, which would not ingratiate Inoichi to him. He could say he did and forge his own documents, which could be proven to be false themselves. Finally, he could claim Agent Konoha as an Uzumaki. A very dangerous and bold claim if it ever got out. There was a reason that Uzushiogakure was wiped off the map. Uzumaki were fearsome. Their prodigies even more so. A prodigal, Uzumaki Jinchuriki. That'd be enough for Konoha to fall in the crosshairs of all of the great nations. Or at least more of the more ambitious nations. That is classified, Inoichi. Classified. He was cut off mid-shout by a rather pointed look. You forget yourself. I have just personally assured you that Agent Konoha is not of your clan. You should now be asking yourself who wished for you to believe the opposite and what they wanted you to do with that disinformation. He tapped his fingers on his desk in agitation, making an enemy of your leader, perhaps. Acting as a fool who said something he couldn't take back, perhaps. Luckily, you were smart enough to see through this charade and realize that I am not your enemy, correct? He could tell that Inoichi was not fully sated, but the anger seemed to have left him. The man gave him a stiff nod. Of course, Hokage-sama. I see now that the matter is more complicated than I was led to believe. Good. You are dismissed. I will inform you of who was responsible for this mess when they have been caught. Inoichi nodded and briskly walked out of the office. He closed the door as close to a slam as you could politely get. Hiruzen sighed and looked to Kakashi. Why is it that every time I get yelled at in my own office, it's either you or someone you bring in here? Kakashi gave a shrug with that infuriating smile of his. Shall I look into who is tampering with official documents, Hokage-sama? Do so. When you find the saboteur, execute them. This feels like one of Danzo's schemes. Start with him first. Hi, Hokage-sama. Things had been quiet for so long. At least, in the village. And Onoki were constant threats, but if Mei was able to be brought in as an ally, of course, now that there was a chance of peace and stability taking hold amongst the great nations, it would be the worst time for intrigue to take root in the village. Things were changing. He was changing. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he had started to become harsher and more decisive. More aggressive in his desire to bring peace to the elemental nations. Pulling rank like that with Inoichi probably wasn't the most diplomatic, but it bought him time to get to the bottom of it. Hopefully, he could figure out who was pulling these strings before Naruto returned to the village. Kurenai laughed at Asuma as he came back down from the karaoke stage. Anko and Hayate were catcalling him as Yugao snickered into her drink. It had been some time since they had a moment like this to sit back and relax. Asuma had seemed off the past few months, and Kurenai was sure it was because he was worried about Naruto. He'd been gone for so long, but there had been no official excuse for his absence. Sealing pilgrimage rang hollow to Asuma's ears as it did hers. The Sarutobi ward was on a mission and Asuma didn't know where he was. Kurenai had a good idea, and yet, she couldn't comfort Asuma with it. Single quote. I caused the massacre of Shadow Valley. I'm Agent Konoha. She felt some of her excitement fade away and withheld a grimace as Anko caught her eye. They had fought over what to do with their knowledge. Tell Asuma to pressure his father, request a leave of absence to go and aid him wherever he was, or do nothing. Wait for him to come home. Kurenade had put her foot down and declared that they'd do nothing. Anko was reticent to wait but obliged. They week. Then one turned into 2. 2 weeks turned into a month. 1 month turned into 6. Naruto had been gone for 6 months and even Kurenai was starting to harbor thoughts of action. They had yet to figure out where he had gone though. Come on Hayate. Sing a song. Nah, I think we all need a break after that one. Yugao laughed and fell into Hayate's side, his hand idly running through her hair. Kurenai smiled again as conversation resumed, and she was able to turn her mind from worrying about Naruto. How've you been Yugao? Anything interesting come up while you've been abroad? Anko innocently asked, though it seemed that Kurenai was the only one who could tell how loaded that question had been. It was unspoken amongst the group that Yugao had been accepted into Anbu. Anbu agents were never to disclose to their families or compatriots their membership of the upper levels. Their identities were to remain secret. It seemed that Anko had waited until they had all gotten drunk before she had started asking questions. You mean confidential? Anko-chan. Everyone laughed and Yugao took another sip of her drink. Kurenai could tell that Anko's smile was struggling to hide her impatience and worry. Quote. I may have heard something off duty that is somewhat interesting. The group all excitedly gave her their attention. I heard from a reliable source that Agent Konoha was seen fighting in the Kiri Civil War. Kurenai felt all her happiness drain away as clawed hands of panic grip her heart. No, it can't be. Anko gaped, but their reactions were dwarfed by Asuma spitting out his drink and Hayate whistling sharply. No shit. Makes sense with what I've heard. Kurenai turned sharply to Hayate and asked, what do you mean? I heard tell that the rebels' forces seemed to have ballooned overnight a few months back. I didn't think much of it at the time but well, it seems the Hokage is wanting to put an end to the bloodbath. Asuma sighed, really wish Dad could tell me about this stuff. Would have been nice to know. He's alone. That would be bad. Hopefully, he had an Anbu squad with him. Pretty sure Might Guy is with him if the rumor of the rebels acquiring a taijutsu master are true. Haven't seen him for a few months if memory serves. That's it. Everyone looked at Anko after her outburst. She was pale, agitated, and her knuckles were turning white with how tightly she was holding her glass. Naruto had been off fighting a war for months and they had done nothing. Kurenai felt her own guilt rising up and couldn't even imagine what Anko was putting herself through right now. Agent Konoha is quite the shinobi. Yugao seemed to reassure the group, he's Anbu, he'll be fine. How old is he, Yugao? Even the tipsy Asuma recognized the ice in Anko's voice. What? I've seen him and he looks like a shrimp. How can you say he'll be fine in Kiri? He's had a stellar record from what I've heard. Anko's eyes pierced through Yugao's backpedaling, and Kurenai knew a fight was about to occur. Quote. You were on a team together, weren't you? No I. Bullshit. You were. Anko. Enough. Hayate's voice harshly cut in. Kurenai could see how it only fanned the flames of her anger. Why? Little Miss Anbu over there allowed her Kahai to wander into a war and has done nothing. I haven't done nothing. I went to Inu. I asked to be sent to Kiri. He denied my request. So you gave up. I didn't. Anko. She fucking left him too. Quite a commotion here. The entire group froze as Kakashi idly flipped through his book in the corner of their room. It was unnerving how none of them had sensed him, talking about village secrets quite brazenly. Shame on you, Neko-chan. Yugao winced and bowed her head, and the group held their breath, as her codename was used to publicly identify her. The threat was clear. She could be dismissed from the Anbu Corp for this. Hi, Kakashi Taiko. It won't happen again. Excellent. I should hope not. He snapped his book shut and lazily looked over them. Kurenai felt herself tense as he paused on her and Anko, quite the popular topic. Agent Konoha is a popular ghost to talk about. No one said anything. Kurenai knew beneath the lazy facade was one of the strongest shinobi in the village and she could tell they had gained his ire. It's always surprising when we gossip about clandestine actions the village may or may not be action on. Thankfully, most Jonin know better. Kurenai could almost see Anko's hackles rise at the barb and just wished for her to keep her mouth shut. Haha. But I know all of you know better than to possibly endanger an on-mission operative. Enjoy your night. He was quickly out of the door and Anko clambered to her feet and was off after him. Anko, sorry everyone, I'll be right back. She saw Asuma begin to follow and she waved her hand as she departed. It's fine. I'll be back. She caught up to Anko on the roof of the building across the street. She was looking for Kakashi, who was long gone. Anko. We should. How dare he? He knew this whole time. He can't tell us. It's against the. Fuck the rules. Yo. They spun around to see him sitting on the edge of the roof, smut in hand. You. Me. I want some answers. Anko growled as she walked up to him. He lazily glanced up at them both. Sure. Kurenai grimaced. This was entirely too easy. Why did? Oh, wait a minute. Excuse me, who are you to ask questions of me? Anko snapped her teeth shut and growled. We are completely out of line and treading in dangerous waters. It would seem that is so. Anko was getting red in the face and shaking, and Kurenai quickly grabbed her by the arm and pulled her back. We're worried about him, Kakashi-san. He looked over at her, ignoring Anko as she ground her teeth. That may be the only reason that you escaped with only a warning. I understand your frustrations, but he is fine. He's out in the middle of a war. And lesser shinobi than he have been sent out into tougher situations before. Yes, he is in danger. But he's been handling it well for over 6 months. There is nothing that you or I can do about this situation. It's up to the Hokage. But if you two know Agent Konoha as well as I do, then you know he won't back out of this now. Not after he's gotten to know the shinobi he's fighting with. His reports speak of the progress he's made in making allies. If all goes well, then Kiri may become a close ally. That would give us an alliance of 4 great nations. It wouldn't be hard to press Iwa into the mold. I don't care about the politics. Anko crossed her arms and Kurenai couldn't remember the last time she had seen her friend this upset. I just care about him. The massacre of Shadow Valley was a lot for him, too much. I can only imagine why he was sent over there, and it's just to fill their ranks. He's not a killer. No. He's a shinobi. As are both of you. Anko opened her mouth to shoot back a retort, but Kurenai took a step forward and stared Kakashi in the eye. We are his friends. He looked up at her and she knew that to most that statement would come off as childish or immature. That the emotion behind it was dwarfed by their roles as ninja of their great village. But, through Asuma and Naruto, she felt that she knew a little bit more than the average shinobi about the elusive Kakashi Hatake. We won't abandon him, even if we face repercussions for it. Anko stood up beside her and grabbed her hand. Damn straight. What she said. He gave them both an idle look and slowly closed his book and put it away. He stood up and sighed loudly before he slowly nodded his head. I'll let you know if anything changes. Be ready for a long deployment in the near future. I'll find you whenever I get word. He looked at them both and gave them a firm nod. He gave a wave of his hand and then he leapt over the edge of the roof. It was then that Kurenai had realized that they had been tested. And passed. She grinned and looked at Anko. Anko, this is great. She saw Anko nod, but she didn't seem relaxed. She still seemed on edge. Why think he expects the situation to go downhill? Kurenai froze and felt her worry slowly begin to worm its way back up to the surface. I think he does. We should go, pack Kurenai. Yeah, we should. Hurry up. Konoha. Let's get this done. Zabuza Momochi said as he walked through the thick mist he had formed. Naruto had long gotten used to the mist the man utilized frequently, as well as his blunt personality. It had taken some time to acclimate to the bloodlust, aggression, and wrath the man kept simmering beneath the surface. Once he had gotten a handle on not gagging whenever his bloodlust spiked, he found that he could appreciate the man's attitude. He was one of those warriors who dedicated their all to their craft. Zabuza believed himself to be a weapon. While Naruto disagreed with the philosophy, he found that he couldn't help but admire the man's loyalty. Naruto could sense it clear as day. The man was absolutely loyal to those who he respected. Momochi would never betray Mai Terumi. He also had a sweet spot that he'd never admit to in his young ward Hakuyuki. He professed that the young boy was only another weapon in his arsenal, but Naruto immediately sensed the concern and worry over the child surviving this war. Working with Zabuza was also far superior to working with Ao. Every time he worked with the holder of the stolen Byakugan, Naruto was worried that he'd realized that Agent Konoha was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. It seemed that Ao was just as worried about having his stolen Kekkei Genkei be discovered. Little did anyone realize the power of his empathy. Mei had quickly distanced herself from him once they reached Kiri, but it was too little too late. Her fears had betrayed numerous secrets of Kiri long before they had reached Konoha's borders. Luckily, none of those secrets jeopardized their mission, and so Naruto was able to continue along as if he knew nothing. That was good, as this war was not what he had been expecting. He had notions of a heroic battle, a last stand for the people of Kiri. Something out of the Warring Clans era or the First Shinobi War. This was a war of the mists. Both sides struck each other, bleeding resources and manpower with no end in sight. Both sides fought to the last man. Both sides used every advantage possible. Naruto had nightmares about some of the battles, and Kurama had long gone silent with his protestations about what he was putting himself through. Come on, kid, let's move. Zabuza took his sword in hand and stood over Naruto's form protectively. You can relax, there's no one near us. Yeah, well, last time you said that and started sealing, someone came up while you were distracted, so I'm gonna stay on my toes this time. Naruto chuckled lightly as he took out his ink and brush and began finely writing minuscule seals on the wall in front of him. I heard you used some futon jutsus in your last mission. So. Naruto tried to maintain his focus as the wet wall he was working on could compromise the integrity of his seals. He had to constantly touch up the seal so as to maintain its intended function. This was his 30th seal today, in a row, and so it was important not to let his exhaustion affect him. So you can use wind style, which means that my theory that your senses are derived from wind currents is a viable theory. Naruto chuckled again as he sensed Zabuza get annoyed at his dismissal of his guess. Momochi didn't like to be wrong. He really didn't like someone younger than him to tell him he's wrong. Doesn't mean it's right. I think it's a better guess than what I've heard back at base. He's got eyes in the back of his head. He's obviously a master water user that controls water in his target's brawn. He's a Nara with dyed hair that has control over the shadows people make. Naruto chuckled as he absent-mindedly listened in. After drawing these seals 29 times today, he felt comfortable in his ability to wrap it up while enjoying Zabuza's speculation. Maybe he's a Jinchuriki like Yagura. Sheesh, those idiots. Naruto tensed and nearly yelled at himself for reacting so visibly when Zabuza took a step back, looking out at the mists around them. I sense it too. Hurry up. Naruto finished the seal as quick as he could and then turned around and drew a kunai. Well, that was a lucky break, eh, Kurama? Naruto, be careful. Before he could even ask what was wrong, he sensed a group of shinobi enter his range of detection and they quickly headed straight for him and Zabuza. One of them was strong. As strong as Roshi and Killer Bee. A massive, swirling ocean of genocidal hate and the undercurrent of despair at being made a prisoner of its own body. Yagura. Well, isn't this a surprise? I never thought I'd see your face here again, Zabuza, except at the front lines of the insurgency. Yagura's form appeared out of the mist as two more elite Junin stepped forwards on either side of him. What can I say? I had a mission. Zabuza sneered as he readied his legendary blade. Ironic, the last wielder of that blade who crossed me said much the same thing. He also stood alongside a Konohan shinobi in his treason. The last one was a missing nin though. Am I right to assume Sarutobi Dono is making a statement, Agent Konoha? Itachi, you fought Itachi Uchiha. He was worried that Zabuza would comment on the desperation in his voice, but Yagura only tilted his head, yes, and soundly defeated him. Now surrender and tell me what you're doing at the walls of my village. Zabuza growled, but Naruto could sense his fear and hesitancy and his shame that he'd be scared to challenge the cage. But Naruto sensed something else in that moment that gave him pause and renewed hope. Liar. You didn't defeat him, he beat you and got away. Yagura scowled and Zabuza chuckled darkly. Really now? My, Mizukage Dono, you didn't seem the type to lie about your own shortcomings. His partner, your sword's previous owner, wasn't so fortunate, Momochi. Besides, he wielded your blade for far longer than you have. He wasn't as good a shinobi as I was. He was a real traitor, leaving his true cage behind. So that's what this is, you choose a pretty face. No, I pick the stronger leader. Yagura scoffed and his two men drew their sabers. I tire of this, Zabuza. I would have expected you to have struck the first blow much sooner. I did make my move, and I guarantee it'll be lethal. Oh ho. Yagura grinned and started slowly making his way forward. I stalled to give my partner some extra time. Naruto could sense the instant that Yagura's eyes locked onto the two kunai he was launching from behind Zabuza. Could instantly sense that his foe was going to evade his attack instinctually but would be too slow in calling it out to his allies. Before the attack had even left his hands, Naruto knew that the other two shinobi were already dead. Get back. The thunk of the two kunai flying 6 inches deep into the trees directly apart from the two Sensory-Nin drowned out the rest of Yagura's words. The weapons were launched with the speed of a top-tier shinobi. Itachi would have been proud. He always valued what you could do with just a few kunai. Before the next syllable left Yagura's lips, the seals to both ends glowed a bright purple and rose up parallel to each other across the 20 feet space between them. The molecular array ignited and supercharged the air straight between the two seals, as the chakra lens matrix guided the channeled ignition into a cylinder no wider than a human thumb. The Raiden catalyst seal completed the sequence and a beam of shining white light exploded from both tags and created a concentrated laser of chakra between the two men. The men cried out in shock and tried to move forwards, which only caused them to bisect themselves in half. The beam lasted for another 4 seconds and made the air smell of ozone and burning flesh. Naruto was just glad that the attack cauterized their wounds. The prototype of that seal hadn't always been so clean. A fuinjutsu user. He scowled and took off his staff from his back. Zabuza chortled at the deadly efficiency of what he once had referred to as a useless shinobi bomb-making art. After a few missions together, Zabuza had a finer appreciation of the usage of combat seals. Got any more of those lightning seals? Unfortunately, I am out of the lightning bisecting beam seals. That's such a bitch to say. Why would someone name it that? All right, I think we could take him. We could end this here and now. He grinned behind his bandages and Naruto sensed his intent to cut Yagura in half. No, we follow Mei's orders. She said retreat if we encounter any resistance. Naruto could sense Zabuza's inclination to ignore orders and grabbed his arm. Don't. We have orders. Don't let your pride get in the way of your mission. Act like the weapon you claim you are. Zabuza snarled as Naruto used his own ideology against him, but Naruto could sense his resolve waver. We land one good attack on him and escape in the aftermath. Fine. Naruto sensed his reluctance to flee from battle and he didn't know if the swordsman would run or not. I might have to fight here. Kurama. Any advice? Isobu is more defensive, but I'm sure his Jinchuriki would know how to turn that defense into a strong offense. Be wary. Naruto nodded and relaxed. He centered himself and allowed his reflexes to take over. Fighting stronger foes with his empathy centered on allowing his sensory prowess to take over. To give himself over to his reflexes for the fastest response physically possible. His adrenaline would spike and his conscious thought could potentially cause him to freeze up or hesitate. There would be no hesitation for him now though. Yagura stared them both down and the only movement was Zabuza readjusting his stance. Zabuza was struggling to contain his bloodlust and show some restraint for once, and Yagura was in the middle of deciding who he felt more insulted by. Finally, Yagura decided upon Zabuza. The next second Naruto was in the air above Zabuza firing off 2 fireballs as Yagura surged forwards. His staff struck for Zabuza's throat and the legendary sword barely repelled it in time. Seeing how easily Yagura moved through the flames, he began to form the hand seals for a Raiden jutsu. Before he could complete the jutsu, he saw Yagura's eyes land upon him and his body moved, flipping back over himself, his jutsu completely forgotten. Konoha. He watched as Yagura's fist neared his face and his instincts screamed as Yagura desired to see his face half caked in coral and screaming in agony. Before Yagura could make his vision reality, Zabuza's sword smacked into his side and sent him flying off. The blade clattered beside him and Naruto realized Zabuza had to have thrown it to save him. He quickly grabbed it to throw it back as Zabuza leapt and dodged Yagura's strikes. Just as his hand gripped the hilt. Flashes of Yagura across a clearing. Red clouds on black cloaks. Ready yourselves. Well, there goes trying to surprise him with your genjutsu. Disorientating movement jutsu blasting red chakra claws. Suddenly the blade shattered but the iron from the blood slowly replenished it. I'm one of the first Jinchuriki to have perfect control of my demon. Do you understand your folly now, Uchiha? A flash of his partner, the solemn-faced Itachi Uchiha, from his peripherals. That's Yagura's coral fist technique. It's important to not let him hit you. Really important. Biwa. A monstrous gathering of chakra, a bijudama, a tailed beast ball. We have to move. Hold on. The wielder didn't flee and met the blast head on. He tried to redirect it with all his might. It wasn't enough, the blade fractured more. The blast was sent up into the air, but half the blade flew into the wielder and pinned him to a tree. The blood of the wielder soaked into the sword and the two became one even as one of the two ended. Itachi, it seems you were more of a match than I was. I want to die here. In this land that I've been from for too long. Be at peace. Two red eyes crying tears of blood then black. He blinked and realized that the fight had continued on without him. Zabuza was bleeding heavily and his left arm was encased in coral. Naruto felt his heart stop for a moment as he realized Yagura was moving in for what he was sure would be a killing blow. Naruto. Kurama, was that my retrocognition? I saw. Your ally. Focus. He didn't even think of a response as he ran off towards Zabuza and threw the Kubikiribocho at him. Momochi. Finally, kid. About fucking time. Momochi latched onto the blade and Naruto immediately sensed Yagura resign himself to a longer engagement. With what he had learned though, Naruto realized they couldn't wait any longer. Yagura was too strong, they couldn't win. Suddenly, the battlefield flooded with mist. Dread filled him as the images he had just previously seen flashed before his mind. Was that you? Nope. We gotta get out of here now. Zabuza was about to retort and Naruto cut him off. He's going to use his biju. What? How did you? Momochi. Your treason ends now. The steam was blown away as Yagura stepped forward, cloaked in the burning red chakra of the biju cloak. Naruto was just glad that Zabuza was cognizant enough to fill with dread at the aura heading towards them. Come on, kid, we gotta. Look out. Yagura immediately went down on all fours and balls of chakra started to form in front of it. Zabuza grinned and readied his blade, intent on trying to knock it off course. Naruto froze for a second as history seemed about to repeat itself. No, no. Yagura swallowed the ball of chakra and launched it. Zabuza roared as he swung his blade. Naruto roared right beside him as a flash seal went off seconds before impact. The light blinded Zabuza and he hoped that would be enough as Kurama's chakra flooded through his arms for almost a second as the tailed beast ball impacted the sword. The sword almost fractured until his chakra surged throughout it and reinforced the legendary blade. The two of them together managed to knock the blast back straight at Yagura. Biwuahahaha. Yes. Zabuza. We have to leave. Right. Naruto quickly started racing through the trees, dropping seals on every surface he could. Zabuza laughed as he kept pace. They had nearly a 20-second head start, and Naruto sensed Yagura reorienting after that monumental blast. He coming for us. Not for long. He pulsed his chakra and 450 exploding tags ignited less than 50 feet from the walls of Kurigakure, blocking off their escape. Ha ha ha. Kid, yes. Finally. The war has come to the bloody mist. Naruto tried not to gag at Zabuza's lust for battle and his own anxiety at the fight to come. Chapter 14. Things had largely settled for Shisui in the past few months. The last message he had received was that negotiations with the Tsuchikage had hit an impasse and that the length of his guardianship of Kuretsuchi may extend indefinitely. He was surprised when he wasn't totally aghast at the news. The two of them had settled into a nice routine, and their cohabitation had become somewhat amicable. There was still at least one escape attempt a week, but the tone of their encounters had turned more into a game to play than a vicious combat. She may have tried to bite out his jugular last time, but she had done it with a smile and laughed when she was smacked down. Her skills were increasing, and Shisui had lightened her seals so that she could maintain her level of chakra control and even train it further. It also increased the difficulty of guarding her and further kept him on his toes. And fuck, it was pretty fun for him. The Uchiha had always been so serious, and Shisui had always been more of a lighthearted spirit. The girl was brash, crass, and bold. He had idly wondered if that is how he'd have been if he'd been born in Iwagakure instead of Konoha. Warden-san. She walked up and handed him their dishes and he took them without even glancing at her. He could smell her and the soap residue on the plates. Could feel the air tremble and shift as she approached. The wood creak underneath her feet. His awareness had grown significantly in these past months just as Kabuto had predicted they would. You want to what? I want to try an experiment on you. Shisui would have blinked in shock but just settled for furrowing his brows and gaping in disbelief. What Kabuto-kun is trying to say is that he thinks the experiment could help you regain your sense of sight without implanting some of the recovered Sharingan that you refuse me to implant into you. I won't use another's eyes. He snarled and clenched his fists. He felt Konoha-sama place one of his hands onto his knee. They were so small, the hands of a child. Smaller than Itachi's when he became Anbu. I understand your fear. You fear that the myths may prove true and that another pair of Sharingan may mutate into a stronger set of eyes. A higher level of power, and that Danzo may find out and try to take them again. More than that, Konoha-sama, I don't even wish to know how my abilities could be improved. That kind of power isn't to be trusted in anyone's hands. The child patted him comfortingly and sat back quietly. Which leaves us to our current predicament, Shisui-san. You've said that the options we had provided you were lackluster. So, this is the only kind of option we have left. I know, Kabuto-san, are there risks? In the darkness that was his sight, he swore he could almost see the man grin. Many. But, the rewards will be so much greater. Single quote. If this is what it takes to serve. He turned his head to where he knew the youngest of the three of them sat. He heard the child sigh. Promise me he'll live, Kabuto-san. I promise, Konoha-sama. And that was enough. The boy stood up and left them in the operating room. While Kabuto busied himself getting ready for the procedure, Shisui found himself laying back and considering what an odd group they made, and how the smallest tradition, of making unbreakable promises, comforted him the most in this new life of living in the shadows literally and metaphorically. His sight was gone, but Kabuto had done his best to amplify his other senses. Extremely so. All of them combined gave him everything he needed to see the world around him. He just needed time to learn how to process his new vision. Sometimes Kuretsuchi caught him experimenting. Slowly pressing a foot down on the floor to hear the full range of the sound, or touching various surfaces with his fingers to examine them, their temperature, texture, and sounds they made upon jostling. After the first few times he had gotten the hang of knowing when she was watching him and when she wasn't. Wouldn't be good to give her too many ideas of just how he was perceiving the world around him. I'm gonna head to bed. Wanna spar in the morning? Of course, Kuro-chan. Maybe you'll beat my winning streak this time. He heard her grumble plain as day, even as she was a whole floor higher than him. He waited until he could hear her breaths even out and her heartbeat slow before he silently headed out of the home. If anyone tried to open any door or window without the proper key seal, he'd know. He quietly made his way through the woods, effortlessly stepping over every hole and rock, ducking beneath every branch, and couldn't help but grin at his progress. He took a new route every day so as to not become familiar with the obstacles in his path. It wasn't his familiarity that kept him safe, it was his senses. Shisui was learning. He was almost ready for combat training again. Without having seen Kabuto-san or Konoha-sama in months, he hoped that one of them would come back soon. He'd have loved to start sparring with his superiors. But Konoha-sama was on an extended mission in Kiri, and Kabuto, well, he didn't know where he had gone off to. But he had the inkling that wherever it was, the man was in dangerous waters. He made it to his training ground and took a breath. He started to stretch, and enjoyed how the cold, night air twirled around his body and danced upon his skin. He swore he could almost feel the starlight bathing him in the clearing that Konoha-sama had shown him. He fluidly moved through his katas and tried to ignore the sound of his bones shifting and rubbing together. Of the sound of blood pulsing in his body. Tried to tune his senses and focus on what he needed. The sound of a person making their way through the woods. He stood up and readied a kunai in his hand. Whoever was approaching was leisurely walking and their breathing was relaxed. They entered the clearing, and from the tone of the stranger's voice, they were male. Hello there. Who are you? The stranger was a shinobi, and as Shisui turned to look at him he could tell the stranger was getting as nervous as he was. Did Danzo send you? The stranger stared at him and crossed his arms. Oh, he had a large chakra pool. Quite a strong shinobi stood across from him. It couldn't be. No. Of course not. Excuse me, but would your name happen to be Roshi? The man tensed, and Shisui knew he had guessed correctly. He quickly sheathed his kunai and nodded to the man with a wide grin. It's wonderful to meet you, Roshi-san. And you are? Ah, excuse me. Shisui Uchiha at your service. Uchiha. Ah. Sorry. I guess without the ahem. Shishui's smile grew slightly strained, but he sensed the man meant not to offend. Yes, without my eyes, it's a bit difficult to tell immediately. My ward is much the same way, she comes from the same village as you. The man relaxed at that knowledge and nodded at him. Roshi realized what he'd done and opened his mouth, but Shishui beat him to it. It's okay. Nodding is fine. Oh, is it now? The Jinchuriki sat down on one of the logs around the fire pit and smiled lightly. I'm not as blind as you'd think. The man regarded him for a few seconds before snorting, of course not. Why'd I think anyone the kid brought into the fold wouldn't be special, is beyond me. You speak of Konoha-sama. The man regarded him coolly for a moment before nodding slowly. Yeah, Agent Konoha. Shishui had to withhold his urge to groan. Of course Roshi would know Konoha's real name. Shishui walked over to the fire pit and sat on the other log next to Roshi. So, what brought you out here? I was hoping to meet back up with the kid. Konoha. Shishui nodded, lamenting that Roshi seemed intent on not letting the name slip. Well, Konoha-sama isn't here. Hasn't been for some time. What did you want to tell him? Ah, I just wanted to regroup and talk about his plans. On my way here I noticed a group of Iwa shinobi heading towards the fire capital, and also wanted to give him that heads up. Ah, they're probably on their way to guard the Tsuchikage in his negotiations with the Hokage. Roshi nodded and took out some field rations and took a bite. Yeah, that makes sense. I figured it was something like that. So, where is the kid anyways? Oh, he's been in Kiri for some time now on some mission. Roshi froze mid-bite and Shishui felt dread flood him. The man should not have reacted like that. Nothing good caused a reaction like that in a seasoned shinobi. What's wrong? Roshi stood up and Shishui stood with him. The Iowa veteran nearly left him then and there, but turned his head to him with a worried frown. At least that's what Shishui assumed it was by the sound of his skin folding. Kiri has been in the midst of a civil war for the past 6 months. There'd only be one thing he'd be a part of if he's been there the whole time. Oh my shit. Shit. He managed to take one step before Roshi held up a hand before him. Stay here, I'm going to go find him. You have your own mission right now. But stop. You've got no justification, you'd just be in the way as you are. The whole world knows about Kiri's war, and that puts certain things I've seen in a different light. What are you talking about? Roshi sighed and looked back towards the fire capital and beyond that, Kiri. I know someone with a vendetta against Konoha, both the village and the agent who has an alibi to take a small group of his forces halfway through enemy lines. I wouldn't be surprised if he had something up his sleeves. Hopefully, I'm wrong. Without another word he left, leaving Shishui standing in the clearing uncertain of what he should do. He didn't know. I see before me the future of Kurigakure. The sons and daughters of the mist. The odds are against us, but the work we've done these past few months has taken us to the moment of truth. Mei declared before the fully assembled might of her forces. They had converted the mess hall into an auditorium and had the maps of their plans hanging behind them. Ao, Zabuza, and Chojuro on her right and Agent Konoha and Might Guy on her left. Her soldiers stood before her somber and electric. Ready to die for the village they loved. We are all called by Kiri. We all have our roles to fulfill. Yagura's regime will not stand idly by and give us our voices, our freedom. So we will take it. I would never ask of you what I myself would not be willing to do, which is why our plan will see me, along with Zabuza and Ao, confronting the tyrant Yagura and putting an end to his reign. The rebels cheered and hollered, yelling jeers and calls for the mad Jinchuriki to be mutilated and seared to death. She couldn't help but notice Agent Konoha tense as the bloodlust filled the room. We will storm the village, and Agent Konoha will create an auxiliary force of clones. These clones will supplement each squad, 2 clones per squad. Squad leaders, I implore you to heed any warnings or advice that these clones provide to you. Should the tides turn against us, Agent Konoha will resupply the battlefield with a secondary set of clones from the rear. She folded her arms behind her back and took a quick second to assess the morale in the gathered force before her. They were excited but nervous. She completely understood. Their plan was to besiege a hidden village. Something each and every hidden village is ready for. A suicide march. We have another advantage in our corner. A few days ago, a critical mission led by Zabuza alongside Agent Konoha was completed. This mission was to plant 30 seals on the walls of Kiri, explosive seals. But They were confronted by Yagura and survived an engagement with him. There were mutterings and confusion spread throughout the chamber. She nodded to Agent Konoha, who took a step forward and coughed to gain their attention. He held himself well and spoke concisely with a confidence in addressing an army of shinobi much older than him. The seals were designed to appear to be explosive seals. By design, if they were to be counter-sealed, that is exposed to a disarming matrix, it would trigger an embedded obfuscation matrix. The boy hesitated when it was clear that they didn't understand him, leaving May to smirk. It seemed he still had some things to learn. She spoke once more and drew the focus back to her. It was a trap. By disarming the seals, they would have been activated. Upon activation, they will have blinded the village's sensor corp, leaving them blind. They stand ready for war, and have for the past few days, but when we strike, they will be caught unaware. They won't be ready for our assault. Just like that, a fire seemed to spread throughout the audience before her. Cheers and roars began to break out as the taste of victory began to settle in. It would do good for morale, but she couldn't let them become too confident until the battle had actually been won. We are on the precipice of victory. But don't lose focus. We have an opening and it will fall on your shoulders to win the day. It will be up to each and every one of you to set Kiri free. Gather your equipment. Ready yourselves. For at dawn we will take our village back. For Kirigakure. For Kirigakure. Dismissed. The cage chambers in the palace of the fire daimyo were far more luxurious than the chambers for any visiting noble. Perhaps except for other daimyo, but it had been decades since a daimyo had willingly traveled into another's palace. Any deliberations between daimyos happened largely in the land of iron. Daimyo were far more trusting of the honorable samurai than of even their own shinobi. Hiruzen found little pleasure in the luxuries presented to him. He had been chided by the fire daimyo, Oda Hideyoshi, over how many anbu he had brought with him as his protection detail. Hiruzen had smiled and assured him that he had meant no subterfuge. He just didn't trust Onoki not to have something planned. Some act of revenge against him. They had fought many times in the past, but Hiruzen held his granddaughter. He was sure that this would be Onoki at his most dangerous. So he sat in his seat sipping tea, waiting for Oda and Onoki to appear. Oda was determined to follow tradition and give Onoki the tour of his palace and its several new wings which had been constructed in the past 15 years since Onoki had seen it. It was sure to chafe at the old cage, and that brought a smile to Hiruzen's lips. His own tour had lasted 2 hours and he had visited not that long ago. A bell lightly chimed and Hiruzen stood and bowed his head as Oda entered the room with Onoki at his side. Daimyo Dono, I have had your favorite tea prepared. Splendid. Old friend. I am particularly parched after that little tour. I'm thinking of adding widened hallways so that my palanquin may travel throughout the palace more freely. Alas, then I'd have to rebuild all the rooms and extend the outer walls, ho ho ho. Oda Hideyoshi was in his early 40s and was something of an indecisive creature. Negotiations were always something of a competition between opposing views, and whoever convinced him enough would be the winner. Of course, he was unlikely to side against his own cage, but daimyo were always a fickle bunch. Onoki had a permanent scowl whenever he was in the land of fire, and Hiruzen wasn't surprised to see it. What was worrying was the gleam in his eye. That never boded well. Well, Hokage Dono, Tsuchikage Dono, you may begin. Oda said as he sipped his tea and then unfolded his fan, covering everything of his face but his eyes. Having been in this situation before, neither man was thrown off. It was finally time to begin the negotiations, in earnest. What all those months of correspondence had been leading to. Hokage Dono. In my first letter, I gave you a month timeline before I would believe my granddaughter to be dead and seek retribution. It has been a little over 6 months and my granddaughter is still not returned to me. That is through no fault of mine when you were unwilling to enter the negotiations for a peace treaty. One kunoichi's life, even if she is my granddaughter, will not pave over decades of grievances. Hiruzen waited as Oda took a sip of his tea, and only when the fire daimyo waved his hand did Hiruzen once more continue the dialogue. You also were unwilling for her to become a ward of the fire daimyo. Glorified hostage. No deal where Iwagakure is beholden or indebted to Konoha is acceptable. Any grievances you speak of are from years past, Onoki Dono. I'm afraid that claiming the massacre of Shadow Valley a grievance against your village is a falsity. That scandal was of your own making and a lesson meant to dissuade you from any further aggression. That was all it took to anger his rival, but surprisingly he didn't jump to the bait. Onoki took a sip of his own tea before responding. Would you happen to know anything about a mission to eliminate a high-ranking shinobi of mine, Sarutobi? One of my Jinchuriki hasn't responded for 6 months. Interestingly, contact with him was lost on the same day as the massacre and abduction of my granddaughter. Using a military engagement to obfuscate an assassination of another nation's Jinchuriki. That sounds like the old god of shinobi to me. Is this true, Hokage Dono? Oda aloofly asked. Hiruzen just chuckled and shook his head. I did not send any operative out to assassinate your Jinchuriki, Onoki. If you've lost communication, it's most likely your own shortcomings. HMMPH. Of course, Sarutobi, it must have been my own carelessness. We're getting a bit off topic, gentlemen. I believe you two wished to discuss the release of Miss Kuritsuchi. Oda disinterestedly offered. Of course, Daimyo Dono. Hiruzen turned to Onoki and laid a paper on the table. In accordance to your own demands, the Fire Daimyo and I have decided that the best recourse would be a gesture of goodwill to the land of fire. Onoki took the paper and skimmed it before snarling, a ransom. A rather exorbitant one at that. You're demanding me to nearly bankrupt my emergency reserves. Ah, good, so you can afford it. Onoki laughed sharply and glared at Hiruzen. Then I want my granddaughter before I leave. Unfortunately, to deter any treachery, she will be released after the funds have been accounted for. Never, there is no way I would ever agree to this, and if you think that the Earth Daimyo would ever let this stand. Ho 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 ho. He's already agreed to it, Tsuchikage Dono. Onoki's eyes flew towards the lethargic face of Oda. Hideyoshi lightly fanned himself, and so kept his small smile secret. If you look farther down the page, he's already signed off on it. It would appear that the sanctions that Konoha, Suna, and the embargo of Kiri have kept many of the Earth Daimyo's pleasures from him. He was pleading with me to push for deliberations to cease and was even the one to suggest the payment when I informed him of the struggles with negotiation. Hiruzen waited, nearly on the edge of his seat, as Onoki glanced between the two of them. Hiruzen had needed to call in a few favors to make this happen, but he had successfully elevated this dispute above just 2 hidden villages. It had evolved through careful cultivation into a dispute of the lands of fire and earth. Offering Oda a large piece of the pie had been perfect. Keeping the Earth Daimyo's pleasures from him had been the master stroke. Well, Tsuchikage Dono, it seems that this would be the most equitable and agreeable solution to our current predicament. Onoki turned his glare to Hiruzen, and he knew there'd be retribution. His fellow Kage wordlessly signed the paper and handed it to Oda, who took the paper with an airy chortle. I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay, Tsuchikage Dono. The land of fire values greatly your altruistic decision to help keep the peace. As soon as the funds are received, a contingent of samurai accompanied by your own guards will escort your granddaughter safely home. For his part, Oda didn't even bat an eye when Onoki continued to glare at Hiruzen, rather egregiously insulting the Fire Daimyo. He just chuckled some more and left the room, leaving his piping hot cup of tea on the table. I had hoped that we could have taken this opportunity to come together, Onoki. If Iwa came to the table, all 5 great nations could lead the way to peace for the elemental nations. You haven't made any lasting peace, Hiruzen, and don't pretend you think otherwise. You've been throwing your weight around recently, and I'm not the only one taking note. It's been a long time, my old rival, but you wouldn't make it through another war, and there isn't quite another leaf shinobi who measures up to your might. I do believe you are wrong on that account, Onoki. Onoki smiled warmly at him and began to laugh. There is one, isn't there? I must say I'm surprised. From what the Raikage told me, you're rather partial to bringing your little protege along to important political meetings. Hiruzen started to feel his skin crawl, but somehow managed to keep his smile amicable. Agent Konoha is on some rather important business, at the moment. Oh, understandably. Onoki took a large sip of his tea and hummed in appreciation. Oh, I simply must have some of this tea. It's your daimyo's favorite, a special blend from Kiri. I'll send some along with your granddaughter, Onoki. Once she's back in your care, I hope we can both agree that further conflict would be rather moot. Oh, don't bother, Hiruzen. I know the tea is from Kiri. The old man grinned widely and started to leave the room, his final words shooting ice through Hiruzen's veins. I've sent some men to go grab me some. I wonder what else they'll find in the land of water. Itachi kneeled before the puppet leader of the Akatsuki with Orochimaru alongside him. Or at least he assumed that. Pain was merely a figurehead for Madara to control from the shadows. Still, the man in charge of the clandestine group of S-ranked criminals was nothing to take lightly. His eyes pierced through shadows and unsettled even Itachi. Congratulations, Itachi-san, Orochimaru-san, on a mission well done. Kukukuku. Thank you, Leader Sama. I'm glad we could complete our mission to your satisfaction. The snake Sannin was always a little too bold when addressing their leader. It seemed that all of his partners were doomed to be arrogant. He idly wondered if Orochimaru would fall victim to his own hubris. I hope I'm there to witness his demise. You are both dismissed. Itachi did not wait for Orochimaru, and left the room as soon as he could. He still wasn't sure what Akatsuki's goal was for sure, but with the players they were starting to amass he knew it wouldn't be for anything good. The group was slowly becoming the kind of threat that he and Naruto had spent afternoons after training theorizing about defeating for the good of the village. If I became Hokage, Itachi-kun, I'd want you to be my right hand in the shadows. What do you mean, Naruto-kun? Like a real shadow. A spy that could get knowledge of any threat but be able to fight himself out of any situation. What if I was the Hokage, Naruto-kun? What would you be? Ha ha ha. Who better to be the Hokage's shadow than the Jinchuriki? He stopped walking and before the boy could even evade the attack, he poked the blonde on the forehead. Ow. You are more than just a Jinchuriki, Naruto-kun. Yeah, but if that's all that the world is gonna see, then I'd use their fear against them. They'd never attack us. You're wrong. They'd just be more careful. Any peace based on fear would be doomed to fail, Naruto-kun. The boy grew silent and he continued walking with him sitting on his shoulders. Quote. Then I'll change how everyone sees me. That's a promise, Ni-san. He didn't say anything, but he couldn't help let a smile dance upon his lips. Your protege has shoved his nose in another one of my schemes, Itachi. Little Agent Konoha fights with the rebels in Kurigakure against Yagura. He didn't falter as he entered his room and started to remove the uniform robe. Madara had only visited him infrequently up to this point, and never for anything more than to talk about the shinobi system. Itachi gathered that he was seeking something from him, trying to find some change within Itachi, but he had long perfected his mask. If he didn't even shed a tear while he brutalized his clan until after the act was done, then no monster was going to prompt a reaction out of him. It seemed Madara had decided the same thing and so decided to change his tact and settled upon Agent Konoha. Naruto. His protege. His second little brother. That must be aggravating for you, Madara. A bit. What do you know of him? He's quite talented. The Sandaime thought very highly of him. Yes, but what do you know of him? His name. Very good, Naruto. I'm quite proud of your progress. No, the Sandaime didn't trust me with details of his abilities or identity. Quote. Did you know the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails? Kurama says that you're a pretty good teacher, Itachi-senpai. He doesn't compliment Uchihas often, either. I would guard the Sarutobi ward every now and then, yes. Could he be Agent Konoha? Itachi took a moment to contemplate the question before he shook his head negatively. It couldn't be. I've seen them both at the same time. It's my belief that the Sandaime changed some aspects of Agent Konoha's appearance to lead others to that conclusion. But the Sarutobi ward is nowhere near the level of Agent Konoha. Very well, Itachi. Let's just hope you haven't been lying to me. Itachi merely nodded. Madara stood up and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned and asked one more question. With Agent Konoha, do you think the rebels will win? Itachi shook his head. Neither side will win, but Naruto will do his best to do as much as he can in that war. That I know for fact. Good luck, little brother. The sun had yet to even rise when Mei chose to strike. The entire rebellion was arranged in formation. She gave the signal and smoke cleared the woods as a secondary army of clones appeared throughout the rebel forces. Her group was given 6 clones of their own. They'd be needing them. Each clone was said to have the fighting capabilities of a low A-rank Jonin. The cheer that broke out in response was quickly silenced by a pulse of chakra. It was unlikely any Kiri scouts would be out here, but she didn't want to risk it. It was just before dawn and Mei couldn't keep her heart from racing. With all of the clones bolstering her force as well, She had never been in command of so many shinobi. She had never entered a battle with so many allies and enemies as this one. They ran through the sparse trees of the land of water and she couldn't help but admire the beauty of her homeland. The grass, the trees, the wildlife, the coastal air, her village. They came to the gates of the village, and the walls, and before she even had to give the order, the clones of Agent Konoha threw wind-laced kunai and killed the guards. This was the moment. This was when she'd truly know if Agent Konoha could be trusted or not, if his fuinjutsu really was as good as he had claimed. Her next step would either alert the army behind its walls or be the first step of her grand trap. She pushed forwards to the wall and her people followed her. Hundreds of shinobi crossed the short clearing and swarmed up the walls like a group of invading ants. The few guards patrolling the top of the village walls were quickly overwhelmed, and suddenly the first wave jumped down and into the streets of Kiri. The sun began to shine down on the village as it slowly began to wake. It was a pity that it would be too late. Her forces spread out and began to occupy each block of the village, street by street. Organized peacefully. The civilians would have a place in her new order. The ones that hadn't profited on the death of the rebels or betrayed them to Yagura, that is. Her group pushed deeper into the village and were making their way towards the Mizukage's tower when they encountered their first resistance. She skidded to a stop. Ao and Zabuza on her sides and the clones in front of them protectively. Across from them stood Fuguki Suikazan, Kitsune Hoshigaki, and a handful of loyalist jonin. Ah, Terumi-san. I see that my hunch is correct. You would be the type to utilize such a brazen and brash approach. She grit her teeth. Their mission required as much haste as possible, and any prolonged engagement with a Samahata wielder would be prolonged. They needed to get to Yagura as quickly as possible. Go, Mei-sama. I can take them. Her eyes glanced to Zabuza, who gripped his own legendary blade tightly. Don't be absurd, Zabuza. You couldn't take him. I can, Mei. Leave me 2 clones if you feel the need to, but you need to get to Yagura. Go. Before she could even agree, 2 of the clones broke off to either side of Zabuza. It seemed that Agent Konoha's abilities did in fact extend to his clones. Ah, Zabuza, I'm disappointed you think you could take me, the leader of the 7 swordsmen. Come off it, Fuguki. The 7 swordsmen mean nothing if we don't even have a full group. Don't worry, once you're dead, I'll take care of leading the new generation of the 7 to greatness. Zabuza, you insolent. Now, kid. Mei was almost surprised when both clones were ready to launch kunai with seals attached. Fuguki and Kitsune evaded the attack, but 2 of the jonin were caught in a sphere of chakra that violently expelled all the air from inside it. One of them was smart enough to cover their mouth, but the other one lost all the air from inside his lungs at once. He clawed at his throat as he asphyxiated and trembled on the ground. Mei dashed forwards with Ao and the 4 remaining clones, possibly leaving Zabuza to his death. Before she disappeared down the avenue, she caught a sight of Zabuza and Fuguki crossing blades and the 2 clones fighting Kitsune and the rest of the jonin. It would be a close thing. Hopefully, the demon of the bloody mist will pull through. Any more ambushers, Ao? No. Mei-sama, I don't see sense any more shinobi ahead of us. Where are all the loyalists? It was good that the rebels hadn't met a ready resistance, but this was too much. Too easy. Too unprotected. Their little band made it all the way to the Mizukage's tower unimpeded, and then a massive spike of chakra stopped them in their tracks. The doors opened and Yagura walked out. Behind him a squad of Kiri Hunter Nin followed. Yagura was smirking as a film of red chakra began to bubble from his body and flow around him. Mei cursed. She was hoping against all odds of surprising him. Surrender. Yagura. We have the village captured. If you stand down, that will be taken into consideration during your trial. Trial. Please. Should I die, I'll die here on the field of battle. He took off his hooked staff and gave it an experimental twirl. I was content to let you rebel rats scurry in the shadows for another few years, but that was a mistake. Come. Bold words for someone caught by surprise. Surprise. We've been expecting you. We. Guy stood in a ready position protecting the young Naruto from any and all assault. The boy was sitting cross-legged in the middle of a copse of trees. They were hanging back with the small reserve of reinforcements. If all went well, that was as close to danger as these men and women would come to today. If they needed reinforcements, then the rebels would swarm the village with a secondary wave of Naruto's clones. The boy and him would remain. This was as close to danger as he was willing to let the boy get. That had been their plan. If things went south, Guy would be fast enough to flee whatever shinobi was sent after them. He was pulled from his musings as the boy's head jerked up and he quickly got to his feet. He followed the boy's gaze and saw some odd birds flying in the sky. Guy-san. Iowa Explosion Corp. He grit his teeth and turned to their allies. Everyone. Reserves. Ready for enemy contact. The kunoichi in charge of the reserve scoffed and rolled her eyes. I haven't gotten the signal from Mei-sama or Ao-sama, so you're just going to have to simmer down. A group of Iowa elites are most likely coming to surprise attack us. Yeah, and I bet an army of Suna puppeteers are coming to pincer them. Fuck off. We mobilize when I get the order from on top. A kunai to the neck silenced the captain and Guy cursed as he swooped up his charge and leapt into the midst of the surprised reserves. Then the earth shook and lights began to flash as explosions began to echo from the village. Ambush. Ambush. Yet it was too late. Guy's booming voice fell on deaf and panicking ears as earthen walls began to rise up behind the force of rebels, blocking them off from the village and aiding their comrades. Pits began to open up in the ground and rocky javelins began to fly through the air as the Iowa fighting force tore through their prey. Agent Konoha. On it. The boy leapt into the air and grabbed onto his arm as Guy readied his fighting stance. As long as I stay ahead of them, fighting with me is the safest he'll be. Guy started his dance of the new living tree style, and was almost distracted by how pleasing the style was. In taijutsu there were rarely collaborative styles. It just didn't lean itself to it. The amount of teamwork and trust that was required was extraordinary. Having someone who could sense your next move and react accordingly was extremely rare and made it all possible. The living tree style would be short-lived, as Naruto would grow too large soon, but it would be legendary amongst taijutsu masters. He moved through the Iowa shinobi launching attack after attack. Screams surrounded the two of them as shinobi fought to the death. The reserves were rallying against the ambushers, but between the pits and the spikes flying through the air the Iowa ninja were setting the tempo of the fight. He watched as one Kiri shinobi tried to fight in tandem with him only to be impaled by an earth spear. Guy grabbed onto the spike and lifted it from the ground, letting his dead ally fall to the ground, and threw it into an Iowa shinobi creating pits underneath backpedaling allies. It was pandemonium. There was nowhere safe to step and suddenly a mist exploded from their position and Guy turned a surprised look to Naruto. The boy gave him a shrug and his masked face looked away sheepishly. Zabuza used it so much and I may have convinced him to show me the basics. Very good. Konoha-san. Yosh. Shinobi of Kiri. Attack. There was a rallying cry and shapes began to fly through the mists. He could hear the Iowa nin begin to curse as they pressed their assault. The earthen walls and the rock spears began to slow as more and more water began to saturate the ground beneath them all. The more water there was in the earth, the harder it became to form the earth as long as they weren't proficient in the mud-style earth jutsus. Guy had no trouble leaping from puddle to puddle and punishing any Iowa nin that allowed him to get close. Feeling Naruto give his arm a rather noticeable pinch, he leapt backwards and just barely missed a water dragon. Sorry, Guy-san. Didn't see you there. A random Kiri nin called and Guy grinned and gave him a thumbs up only for an explosion to throw him off his feet. He curled in reflexively and opened his eye only to feel a pinch on his arm. He jerked his body back as fast as he could only to see an earth spear graze Naruto's arm. Agent Konoha. Are you? A poof of smoke answered him and suddenly the boy was gone. Clone. But, then where? Oh. No. Guy twirled to face the large earthen wall and the city besieged by bombs beyond it. How? Guy rocketed off straight at the wall and as he neared pulled up his knee at the last second and kicked. The wall shattered and began to collapse from the center, but, Guy was already clear of the rubble and making his way towards the city. Kakashi would kill me if you died, kid. You better hold on with your power of youth. I'm coming. Bombs began to fall into the village and panic began to ensue as the civilians fled their burning homes and sought shelter. Windows shattered and buildings collapsed, people would scream in fear and be suddenly silenced. For the unlucky, their screams were prolonged and grew in intensity and desperation. He was slaughtering her people, his own people. She never saw him as more of a monster. May's blood thrummed through her veins as she felt rage and hate fill her. You maniac. You're bombing your own people. And the enemy army. Only the strong deserve to live in Kiri and the strong will survive. She snarled and spat a deluge of lava at Yagura. A geyser of water shot him up into the air and he ran to the top of the tower. Ow. Take care of the guard and assist me. Roger. Mei-sama. He dashed forwards to engage the hunter nins with 3 of the clones and one last clone came to her side. Are we to engage Yagura, Mei-san? Hi. When I give you the signal, release the second wave. She wasted no more time on talking and followed up the tower after the tyrant. I have to finish this. Before he destroys everything we've fought for. She had never considered that Yagura would destroy his own village out of ruthlessness and spite. It seemed that she'd have to learn to think the absolute worst of her enemies. He's waiting for you. The clone called out as she neared the top of the tower. Thanks to the early warning she was easily able to dodge to the left of a flurry of water bullets. Yagura was encased over his entire body in a chakra cloak but he had yet to grow any tails. It seemed he still wasn't taking her seriously. All the better for her. Mei rushed in weaving jutsu after jutsu, pushing herself to her limits and then past them. Fighting Yagura was like fighting her waking nightmare. She had dreamed of how this fight would go down for months, years, and the pressure was insurmountable. She was fighting the bloodthirstiest foe she had ever fought. A foe in which no trick was too dirty, no action inexcusable. She worried that in the event he had actually had the forethought to plan contingencies should he fall in battle. The smallest, most merciful part inside her whispered that Yagura could still be a patriot at heart. Could still truly be a Kiri shinobi at his core. That this facade could only be a result of the genjutsu he was under and nothing more. She couldn't take that risk. He was too susceptible to be trusted. There was no way to guarantee he couldn't be controlled again. He was right, in his case. Only the strong would survive. Whoever won this fight would be the only one of them that would remain living. I see you hesitating, Mei. Well, be assured I was ready for your assault. I figured with assistance from Konoha you'd be emboldened to strike me directly. Well, just to show you how fruitless this all was. He pulsed his chakra and held his arms up in presentation and from atop the tower she watched as the loyalist shinobi army poured out from atop rear wall towers. Out of the blast zone in the city below. Safe, rested, and ready to murder those under her command. No, it's fruitless, Terumi. Even if you best me here you have lost. Surrender, and some underneath you can still be spared. Her heart broke as the loyalists began to engage the rear rebel guards still atop the walls, as the smoke filled her nose, and the dust nearly made her eyes water. Kiri burned. She centered her energy as best she could and fought with no reserve. No opening was too small to take advantage of. No attack could be allowed to land. Yagura would die today. He easily batted away a lava dragon but hissed as a cloud of steam burst from beneath him. In the second that he flinched she fired a stream of lava. He leapt up into the air and grabbed the leg of the clone seeking to kick him down into the melting floor beneath him and launched it down in turn. She idly watched as the clone swung to safety with ninja wire it had prepared but gave it no further attention. In a moment she was in Yagura's face and the chakra over his face distorted his pink eyes and obfuscated his feral teeth, his canines elongating. He went to cripple her with a coral strike, but a precise spurt of lava had him abandon that plan. He retaliated with a kick that launched her to the edge of the roof. She coughed up blood and heard him laugh. She looked up with a wicked grin and revealed his staff she launched as far back as she could into the warzone behind them. Looks like you lost your favorite toy, Yagura. You lost more than that this day, Terumi. Then he was upon her. There was no grace, no style, no pattern to his attacks, just sheer, raw force. She had no time for jutsus and neither did he. She began to tire and yet he never slowed down. He began to intensify his pace. She stumbled back and she saw victory flare in his eyes as he went in for the kill. Mei-san. She felt a small hand grab onto her arm and twirl her away and out of danger. The clone landed with her with blood soaking down its arm. She blinked and realized that the original agent Konoha stood beside her and had been for the whole time. That had not been according to plan. Well, that was a close one, Kurama-kun. I'd prefer if we didn't risk your life for this woman, but then I'm not too fond of this whole situation. You won't last without my chakra. I have to. I can't let anyone figure out I'm the Jinchuriki. I know. Bah. I hate subterfuge. Kurama. Fine. Fine. RGGGH. If you could touch him, I might be able to surge enough of my chakra into him to disrupt the genjutsu. Touch him. He's a Jinchuriki cage. I can't even get near him. I didn't say it'd be easy, kid. Now hurry up, your ally seems to have gotten past her near-death experience. Maybe with using her to distract him. Don't be too excited yet, she's figured out your ploy, kid. Naruto withheld a wince as he immediately sensed the same thing. She knew he wasn't a clone and he could sense her paranoia spike. Wow. She really didn't trust him. What are you doing, Konoha? Why have you deviated from the plan? May seemed intent on scolding him even as they both barely dodged blasts of highly pressurized water from Yagura. Without his empathy he'd long be dead. He just wasn't fast enough on his own to dodge the attacks of the three-tailed Jinchuriki without prior warning. I sensed something amiss. So you didn't inform your commander, and decided to tag along. Those loyalists are going to slaughter my forces and then pincer the reserves. He glanced at the charging army of the enthralled brother of his and realized that without a second wave of clone reinforcements the rebels would lose. You don't have enough chakra to do both. If you make a second batch, you won't have enough chakra to escape May with Yagura's body, and that's even if you win, kid. I have to. I have no choice. I won't let this fight turn into another massacre. It already is one, kid. He glanced up as a large cloud of dust exploded in the distance. Something had just blown down the massive village gates. From the outside. I'm not alone, Kurama. Guy is here. I think he's even coming for me. If I can just prolong this fight. Prolong. I can do this. Do you trust me? He panted as he dodged yet another barrage of water projectiles that aimed to separate his head from his body and asked again, do you trust me? Do it, don't let me down, kid. You'll never hear the end of it from me in hell if you're wrong. He grinned despite the odds and leapt to the back end of the tower and put his fingers together. Massive shadow clone jutsu. A massive cloud of smoke appeared on the walls of Kiri closest to the tower and a massive army of hundreds of clones rushed from inside it down either end of the cloud. He barely had a chance to watch as they quickly reached the rear of the loyalist forces before two fronts of fighting began to take place on the walls. He grinned even as the exhaustion fit in. He had promised himself that he'd try to save as many lives as possible. He had to keep it. That was his nindo. His rule. He watched as May fought Yagura and couldn't help but be in awe. He had a good sense of how strong the Sandame was, but he had never seen him fight full out. Yagura and May shook the entire tower with every strike. Every attack collapsed buildings into rubble down to their foundation. There was a gaping hole in the middle of the top of the tower, and he had a feeling from the noxious fumes that wafted up from inside that the lower floors had not endured May's assault unscathed. Naruto threw kunai, exploding tags, shuriken, everything. He had never been pushed this hard and he still couldn't even get close to Yagura. It was infuriating. For so long he had been so confident and comfortable in his strength. He still had so much farther to go. If this is how good I can do without utilizing your chakra, Kurama, then I need to step up my training. Focus. Boy. Plan later, survive now. The two titans before him left no opening, and he was frustrated to sense that May was purposefully trying to keep him from reaching Yagura. Her paranoia was consuming her. She was expecting him to turn on her, but she didn't realize that he meant to betray her in another way. By saving Yagura's life instead of ending hers. Their dance continued on, and Naruto quickly began to tire. He couldn't keep up. They were too fast, too strong, too powerful. And then one of the bombs from the Iwa-Nin above landed just a bit too close to the tower. The air trembled with the force of the blast and the surprise of how close it detonated. Created a 1 in a million opening. Now, Naruto felt his right leg shatter from the force of the chakra. He exploded throughout his muscles and he flew through the air, over the fumes of lava that poisoned his breath and burned his skin, singed his hair, through the smoke, underneath a torrent of water, and the flesh of his fist seared as it entered the cloak of Isobu's chakra and then made contact with Yagura's flesh. Naruto bit his tongue as he tensed his jaw in agony as he mentally shouted, Kurama. You are amazing, kid. Biwu ahahaha. Isobu. Your Ni-san is here to save you. Naruto felt a spike of chakra, then he felt the bloodlust, the hate, and the anger of Yagura immediately bleed away. Fear and confusion remained, and then everything disappeared as he was sucked into Yagura's mindscape. Guy was covered in smoke, ash, and dirt before he made it to the first large plaza of the village hidden in the mists. The bombardment had begun to peter out after a few minutes. The damage was extensive. It would take a number of resources to rebuild, no matter which side was victorious. It left a bad taste in his mouth. He could have remained with the reserves and fended off the majority of the Iwa ambush, but they weren't his comrades. It wasn't the first time he had abandoned another village's shinobi to save an ally of his own village, and it probably wouldn't be the last. It didn't make him feel proud though. He wasn't here to win pride or glory on the battlefield though, or even enjoy his jogs on the beach. It was to protect Naruto Uzumaki as a personal favor to his best friend Kakashi. Seems Kakashi actually wasn't exaggerating how much a magnet for trouble the kid is though. Yosh. Better catch up to him quickly. He skidded to a halt before him. The survivors of a pitched battle stood determined to end their foes. Zabuza panted heavily alone on one side. Two other battered swordsmen stood across from him. Guy recognized one of them, Fuguki Suikazan. One of the men who had killed his father. Yosh. Revenge doesn't thrive well in the Garden of Youth, Guy-chan. What are you doing here, Guy? Zabuza growled out. From a quick glance he could tell that if the demon of the mist kept fighting he'd be a dead man. With another glance he could tell the same thing about Fuguki. Zabuza. He is quite the demon, after all. Impressive. Agent Konoha didn't remain with the reserves. I'm guessing he accompanied your group to engage Yagura. Ha. Kid wanted a rematch. Sounds about right. Yerk. Zabuza's leg collapsed underneath him, but he fell into a kneeling position. Fuguki panted and held a hand to stop his associate from engaging. It seems the blue-skinned man was the most unscathed of the three of them. It's fine, Kitsune. I can get us out of this alive. You there, Konoha Shinobi. Fuguki pulled out a few scrolls and an unblemished Konoha Hitai-8. I've been selling Konoha information on Yagura for years. I wish to defect. Save me and my associate and I will start a generation of 7 swordsmen under the banner of the leaf. You fucking coward. Zabuza raged. You traitor. You fucking snake. Don't listen to him, Guy. He needs to pay. Fuguki laughed and took a step closer. Give it up, Zabuza. Me and my ally over here will be leaving, along with Kitsune. This village is pathetic. The weakest of the Great Five, and everyone knows it. It only made sense to get what I could from its dying corpse before moving on. The 7 swordsmen of the leaf has a terrifying edge to it. Of course I'll be needing that blade back. What do you think, Kitsune? Would you like to bear the Kubakurbocho as my right hand? Guy tensed as Kitsune began to walk forward but didn't even blink when he shoved his katana through Fuguki's heart. Kitsune. Why? You're a liar. You're weak. I will take one of the 7 blades today, just not his. Kitsune grinned with his pointed teeth and twisted his blade. Yours. A traitor's death and shame is all that awaits you, Fuguki. Guy didn't move as Kitsune grabbed the hilt of Samahata. He seemed to relish it and flourished it, seemingly unfazed by its weight. He leveled the shark-skinned sword at him and Zabuza and grinned. Time to finish putting you rebels down. I'm still expecting a good fight. Hey, I wouldn't be too confident about that, my friend. Kitsune tilted his head and looked mightily amused. Oh. And why is that? My name is Might Guy, son of Might Dai, the eternal genin. Stand down and no harm will come to you. Fuck that, we can take him. Zabuza-san, stand down. No. Kitsune had a dark grin on his face. He seemed to be overwhelmed with confidence after now finally acquiring what Guy could only guess he had so long desired. Why would I care about your weak father? Really? What kind of victory could the eternal genin have achieved that would make me fear you? You know what a true victory is. It's not beating someone strong. It's being able to protect something important to you. Guy smirked and gave a thumbs up. Yosh. Because my father saved me and my squad mates from the full wrath of the 7 swordsmen of the mist, and he sent 4 of them to an early grave. Both swordsmen jerked back as if struck. It had been years ago, but that kind of defeat would not be forgotten so easily. And my father gave me the confidence and training to surpass him. So, come, test your newfound power against the teachings of the eternal genin. Guy began to see a flicker of doubt worm its way into Kisami's expression and knew that he wasn't quite as confident as he was a moment ago. Morale was half the battle, so he was off to a good start. Then the telltale crawl of a Biju's chakra filled the air. Guy and Kitsune both looked to the end of the village where the tower stood. It was clear Yagura was utilizing his biju. Naruto was in extreme danger. I'll settle this with you some other time, Konoha-nin. He shouldered his new blade and smirked at Zabuza. Too bad we didn't get to have that duel after all, Momochi. It's alright, I don't think I would have even enjoyed it at this rate. Fuck you, Hoshigaki. Zabuza took a step and then collapsed onto the street. Guy watched as Kitsune made his way to the tower and knelt down by Zabuza. Zabuza-san, I think the Explosion Corp have started to make their retreat. I'm gonna move you to cover and then hurry up and go after him. Guy picked him up and set him down near a busted fountain, and before he could leave, Zabuza gripped his arm in a vice grip. Don't let her die. I won't. And then he was gone, racing after Kitsune to the battle that would decide the fate of Kurigakure. Once again Naruto stood beside Kurama in a great white void. The way that the room seemed endless and also suffocating was surreal. Kurama looked like he should be slamming against the ceiling, but was able to raise himself up to his full height. Across from them stood Yagura, and beside him a giant, three-tailed turtle. Its armor was a dull green and heavily spiked. It had two massive arms, and its three tails were covered in the same plate-like armor as its shell. One of its eyes seemed to be permanently closed. Naruto sensed its wariness like a coiled snake. Its hurt was an ever-present, bleeding wound in Isobu's heart. He was a gentle soul and he had been traumatized by the shinobi world. Naruto couldn't help but want to make him feel better. No one should feel that alone in the world ever. Yagura, on the other hand, was extremely confused. He had quickly recognized that Naruto was a fellow Jinchuriki after realizing who Kurama was, but he seemed even more thrown off than he should have been. He didn't remember anything. Anything from after a dark shadow appeared before him, and a red light flashed, and then nothing. Hello, Yagura Karataki. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and this here is my friend. He gave Kurama a pointed look as Yagura regarded them both with an eyebrow raised. Quote. Kurama. The nine-tailed fox. We wanted to talk to you. What's going on here? Yagura asked. He crossed his arms and Naruto wished that he had manifested with his mask over his face. Yagura's eyes were piercing and almost unsettling. Isobu lowered himself down to a more even level with Yagura and spoke. His voice was much more childlike than any biju should have, but Naruto wasn't about to say anything. Kurama lightly chuckled at his thoughts though. You were under a genjutsu, Yagura-chan. As was I. We haven't been ourselves for, I think, years. It's hard to tell. Kurama-ni-san saved us. Why? Why would you save me? Yagura gestured at Kurama. Headbands didn't matter when the worst kept secret in all the nations was which villages had which Jinchuriki. Because of what we are, who we are. Honestly, if you were the tyrant that the world thinks you were, I would have killed you and tried to save Isobu. As of now, I know that both of you wouldn't want that. That is, that you aren't responsible for the civil war in Kiri. Civil war. Naruto felt a great sorrow blossom in Yagura, and it bled into him as well. It would be nightmarish to suddenly come back only to learn he had nearly destroyed the village he loved. Yes. You started purging your village of all bloodlines. Meitarumi rose up to usurp you and hired me to help. And instead you are here to save me. Yes. Naruto grinned widely. I want to make a world where the biju are never imprisoned again. And to do that I aim to save each and every one of them. Haha. I already got one. His name is Roshi, and he's the Jinchuriki of Son Goku, the Four Tails, and I met Killer Bee, who is the Jinchuriki of the Eight Tails, and he seemed to like me, and I know that the Jinchuriki of the Two Tails is named Yugito. Yagura suddenly got into his face with his hands on his hips. All right there, knucklehead, you're rambling. Naruto chuckled sheepishly and scratched the back of his neck as Kurama laughed. I'm glad you've made a friend, Kurama. It's so nice to meet you, Naruto-kun. Naruto grinned and gave Isobu a thumbs up. It's awesome to meet you too, Isobu. I'd love if we could be friends. You're crazy. Yagura was looking at him as if trying to understand why Naruto would care about total strangers. A Jinchuriki and his demon. Naruto felt his resolve steel. It shouldn't be surprising for someone to care. Yagura and Isobu seemed like great people. I got a plan. We just need to make it look like you died. Yagura scoffed and scowled between the two of them, and just abandon my village. I don't really care, human, but your village already wants your head. If you come with us, then maybe you could save Isobu. He seems to really care about ya, and I'd hate for him to lose someone he cares about. Single quote dot dot dot. Thanks, Kurama. I'm so glad that you're here. Kurama walked over and threw his arm over Isobu's shoulders, laughing. As if this wasn't the first time the two of them had seen each other in dozens of years. You don't have to defect to my village. You don't have to join my plan. You can walk away, find your own peace. But, you're welcome to stay and I can show you places to hide. I promise to keep you safe. A promise. Really? I always keep my promises. Yagura searched him for any deceit and then he gave a hesitant nod. Okay, so here's my plan. Naruto blinked his eyes open and watched as Yagura staggered back disorientated. Mei was suddenly on the Mizukage and engaged with a flurry of blows. She managed to land a few debilitating strikes before he was able to launch her back. His Jinchuriki cloak faded and then he was dodging bursts of lava launched at him. Naruto was suddenly there and fighting and Yagura worried that he would betray him. But, he decided to play along. Naruto would pay that trust back tenfold. He's willing to work with us, Kurama. This is amazing. That's 3 Jinchuriki. We're farther than I ever thought we'd get, Naruto, but be careful. This will be hard to pull off. Yagura went to strike him and Naruto, easily, created an opening and planted a stack of flashbangs. Not enough to kill, but Yagura would need assistance fleeing afterwards. Mei saw his opening and darted in with a kunai. It neared Yagura's stomach. Naruto slammed into her and knocked off course. In the instant that she was knocked aside, he seamlessly created a single clone. He dove at Yagura and knocked him off the edge of the tower. You better make this work, shrimp. Shrimp. I'm only 8. A massive explosion emanated from Yagura's chest as the seals exploded at once. It knocked the air from his lungs and sent him flying towards the ground. He wordlessly activated 2 seals on him and Yagura chakra suppression seals. Now it'd be harder to sense their locations. We have to run to Konoha. Do you know the quickest way to get there? I know a route. I'm gonna need help though. Did you have to use that many? Anything less would have been a stretch. Come on, it's a long way before we're safe. On top of the tower, Mei got back onto her feet and watched as the rear half of the Mizukage tower collapsed into itself. Agent Konoha laid groaning a few feet from her. What was that explosion? I used the last of my explosive tags on him. Is he dead? She hummed and looked over the edge of the tower. I don't see him, maybe. She turned back and looked out over the village. No clones remained, but the last of the loyalist forces were being taken prisoner. She had won. They had won. The rebels had taken Kurigakure. Or what was left of it. As she stared at the devastated and cratered wreckage of her once grand village, Guy jumped up and immediately started to ask Agent Konoha's condition. He stood and turned to her with the agent over his shoulder. The Iwa forces have retreated. The day is yours, Mizukage-sama. Congratulations. He turned to leave and she spoke up. That's it. You're just leaving. Orders. The mission is completed and now it's time to leave. Then he was off, running faster than even she probably could go. It was all so sudden. All the planning, the subterfuge, the tricks, and this was it. Her grand victory with her village in flames. Ao appeared beside her. Congratulations, Mei-sama. Mizukage-sama. Organize a search team to find Yagura's remains. Track it down and if he escaped, hunt him down. This was too easy and I am beginning to suspect we've been set up from the start. If you find anyone with Yagura, execute them. Chapter 15. 2 shapes flitted between the branches of the trees on the shores of the Land of Fire. As they passed, a mist quickly blew into the woods and drifted after them. Naruto grunted as he stopped on a branch. He didn't start as Yagura leapt back to check on him. They had made good ground, and had reached the Land of Fire, but they weren't safe yet. The Kiri Hunter Nin were ruthless and efficient. Their pursuit was endless. Yet, even if they ran into a Konohan patrol, they wouldn't necessarily be in the clear. Saving Yagura had never been discussed or approved. And while Naruto was pretty sure that he wouldn't face any strong repercussions, he couldn't guarantee Yagura's safety. It wouldn't be too far-fetched for the Sandaime to hand him over to Mei as reparations. No, Naruto was on his own for this one. Is it your leg? Yagura seemed both aloof and concerned. Naruto could sense his anxiety. The man was loath to be caught as well. At least he wasn't contemplating leaving Naruto behind. Yet. Why yeah, every time we take a break it heals a bit. And then they push forward and when we run, all your progress is undone. Quote. Yes. Yagura stood up and looked beyond him, to where the mist was slowly spreading throughout the woods and floating towards them. They're trying to tire us out. We can't head towards the village, they're already likely to report that we ran to the land of fire. Yagura gave him a piercing look and Naruto got queasy. There was a cold and calculating part of Yagura that had stuck around after the genjutsu had been broken. And a grief deep in his soul that he was ignoring at losing his home that Naruto couldn't help but sense. It was impossible to ignore, but he tried to give his brother some privacy and hadn't said anything about it. It wasn't the time to help him feel better. Yet. If you desire for them to be terminated as the safest option, then just say so. No. That's what you're saying. You don't want Terumi to know that you saved me. You think we should kill them. Naruto stood up as tall as he could and looked Yagura in the eye. My training tells me that it's the smartest move. But the smartest and most ruthless move isn't always the right thing to do. I'm not going to ask you to kill your people. I refuse to. He winced as another flash of pain flared in his leg as the bone refractured for the 15th time. If he didn't allow himself some time to rest soon, then he risked doing permanent damage to himself. Yagura continued to stare at him before he lightly smirked. Ah, look at the little kid trying to be a big, strong shinobi. Naruto blushed in embarrassment as Yagura chose once more to tease him. Whenever he would try to get serious or vulnerable, the man would choose to remind him of his age, although, a part of him wondered if that's how siblings acted with one another. Shut it. Shut it. That's what you're going with. Naruto wasn't used to getting so flustered, and neither was he used to Kurama laughing at him when someone else teased him. It seemed that the fox had quickly warmed up to the Jinchuriki of Isobu. Before Naruto could say anything else, Yagura bent down and scooped him up into his arms. Hey. What are you doing? We need your leg to heal, and running on it isn't helping. Yeah, but this will slow us down, and it's not like you're all healed up either. I know your ribs are still fractured. Yagura grinned as he leapt to the ground and started sprinting. Yeah, but I don't have to hide that I'm a Jinchuriki. As he spoke, Naruto watched as coral began to grow over Yagura's chest and molded into a light cast. The coral was flexible and didn't seem to inhibit his breathing, and then a green-hued chakra began to glow from it. Wow. Yeah, Isobu takes good care of me. Naruto felt bloodlust fill the air just as a bank of fog shot past them and blocked off their path. 2 combatants, 9 o'clock. Kunai with exploding seals. Yagura grit his teeth and tightened his grip on Naruto, and flipped through the air and off to the right. The kunais detonated and kicked up dirt into the air. Naruto sensed 4 more combatants enter his range. Yagura sensed them too, and so Naruto kept quiet. As Yagura ran through the mist, expertly navigating the forests as if it wasn't even clouding his vision, Naruto was chaining hand seals as quickly as he could. Earth style. Rock wall. Wind style. Razor flurry. Earth style. Stalagmite field. He casted multiple jutsus in their path, and he sensed as it held off their enemies' offensives. Walls of rock erupted in front of kunais, prematurely detonating their explosive seals. Blades of wind cut through the mist, both dissipating the water, saturating the air and causing their pursuers to evade. Yagura was slowly gaining ground against them, and then they ran out into the middle of a road. Across from them a whole squad of hunter nin stood waiting for them. Fuck. Yagura cursed as Naruto quickly pushed himself out of Yagura's arms. He took a ready stance. His leg had managed to do some healing, but he knew that it would only take one hard impact before it was incapacitated. He quickly entered the interceptor stance and took a breath. Yagura Karataki. By order of the Mizukage, you are charged with treason and sentenced to death. You may surrender and face trial, or refuse and face an immediate execution. Yagura wasted no time and without a single word began launching blasts of pressurized water from his mouth at their enemies, and the battle began. Naruto once more found himself in a supporting role, and it was eerily similar to how he had fought with Mei all those months ago. He was dancing around Yagura and striking at those that got too close. It wasn't looking good. Jinchuriki were strong but not without limits. He and Yagura had not recovered from their fight and had no chance to recover. Things were grim. Yagura had decent odds of fighting out of this, but Naruto's odds were slim. With the amount of clones he had used in the final battle, the lack of sleep, the fight against Yagura, and their restless flight from Kiri, he was working off fumes. You could use my chakra, kid. No, then they'd know. Then they'd all have to be killed or captured. It's already gotten to that point, kid. They know who you are and you know that yourself. You just don't want to admit it. Naruto fended off a kenjutsu assault as the ground became ever slicker with water. Water was one of Naruto's inherited affinities, but Kiri Shinobi lived and breathed incorporating water into their fighting styles. He was outmatched and his control over the water around them only managed to keep them from landing any lethal blows. He managed to keep the water underfoot saturated with enough of his chakra to keep it from being turned against him, but other than that any blast he sent could be redirected after completion of the attack. This isn't good. Yagura panted as his coral cast leaked blood from underneath. They stood back to back. Yagura had managed to take out a handful of their pursuers, but it didn't seem like it'd be enough. Naruto. He dodged the kunai thrown at his head and tossed one back, hitting the Jonin in the shoulder. They were starting to close in on them. He didn't have a choice. He'd have to use Kurama's chakra. Except Yagura decided to use Isobu's chakra first, and two red tails shot out from a cloak of chakra near instantly, and Naruto couldn't help but be amazed at how easy it was for him. Seems he and Isobu really are close, and I bet that their seal is not even a fifth as strong as yours, kid. We can be like that someday. I'd really like that. The fighting took a more frenzied tone as the Jonin all rushed in at once. The next few minutes, which felt like hours, were filled with the clashing of knives, bursts of water tearing into flesh, blood mixing into the mud and water, and fear. Fear clogged the air with a noxious grip. Naruto's eyes began to slowly tear, and as he gagged he slipped. His current opponent kicked out and Naruto was barely able to block it. With his fractured leg, with a cry he fell onto the ground, unable to do anything but cradle it. Yagura stepped over him and took a guarded stance, but it wouldn't be long before he was also overwhelmed. They were surrounded and the hunter nin sensed their weakness. There'd be no quarter. They were like sharks swarming in for the kill. I'm sorry, Kurama. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Kid, it's okay. It's fine. You're here. You're here and I'm here. And before Naruto knew it, he was sucked into his mindscape. Over the years it had changed into a vast field reminiscent of one near the border of a megacure. The sealed doors remained the same, however. He was brought before the cage of the Kyuubi, his best friend, and he sobbed as he dashed through the bars and leapt into Kurama's open arms. The massive fox sat back and cradled him tightly with his massive arms, whispering comfort to him constantly. I don't want to lose you. I'm scared, Kurama. Shish, kid, hey. It won't be so bad. You're in here now with me. You'll be just fine, we'll go together. He just closed his eyes as hard as he could. He had never been so terrified. So scared. He thought of all the people who counted on him. All his family who would be devastated at his passing. He thought of the Sandame eating dinner with him at least once a week. Of Kakashi checking in whenever he was training and giving him advice and telling him stories of his parents. Kabuto going above and beyond to make sure that Naruto had every advantage and asset he could get him. Of the days when Itachi would share his dream of a future filled with peace. He regretted that he'd disappoint them all of the promises that he'd be breaking if he died. His breathing began to get more regular as he felt hopelessness overwhelm him. But, just as he was about to give in, his anger began to spike within him. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that he worked so hard, tried so hard, and to fight so hard only to lose this early in the game because he was holding back. And Kurama because of the seal he'd be dragged down along with Naruto when he died. They both stilled and Kurama looked down at him as he looked towards the doors of the cage where the seal laid. Kurama. Naruto. Just because I die doesn't mean that. Stop. Just stop, kid. No. It was spoken with such conviction that for the first time in his life, Kurama was stunned into silence. No. Naruto stood up and jumped to the grass below. He gave Kurama a huge grin as tears filled his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. No, this may be how I die, but you should stay behind. We have Son Goku and Isobu on our side. You can carry on the fight. You can free the Biju. Naruto. Goodbye, Kurama, you were more than my friend. You were my family. He turned to tear off that cursed seal that his father had used to imprison the closest friend he'd ever had. Before he could reach it, a massive, clawed hand blocked his path. Kurama. Kid. Wait, isn't that? Kurama closed his eyes, straining his senses, yet when he took a breath Naruto could sense them too. No, it couldn't be. Immediately, his eyes flew open. He still laid underneath Yagura's legs, barely 2 seconds having passed, and yet as each second ticked by it became easier and easier to sense them. They were here. He had no idea how they had found him. But they were here. His brothers. Konoha, I think this is it. No. Yagura. It's reinforcements. That's what I'm saying, kid. The ex-Mizukage panted as he repelled another strike from one of the dozen shinobi surrounding them. No for us. Yagura stilled as he then sensed the chakra of the newcomer to the duel. A second later all the hunter-nin froze as they sensed the massive chakra signature and then heard the sound of crashing trees. A cacophony of destruction drew closer, and yet Naruto had never been so relieved. Yagura was still tense, but Naruto sensed that he was beginning to understand what was coming to their aid, if not exactly who. You sure that they're coming to aid us, kid? Oh, yeah, that could only be Roshi. Roshi. Naruto grinned. Number 4. Yagura grinned. Amazing. How fucked are they? Completely. The hunter-nin's fear spiked and turned into dread and panic as an explosion of smoke and ash shot up from beyond the tree line behind them and headed straight for them. Fall back. Fall. Yagura threw himself over Naruto and a dome of coral began to quickly grow over them. Just before it covered them completely, Naruto watched as a pillar of magma shot up from the ground and consumed 3 of the hunter-nin. They didn't even have time to scream before they died, and though Naruto knew they didn't even feel the pain from their deaths, the fear they felt as they realized how they would die nearly caused him to gag. Roshi inspired a primal, naturalistic terror as he fought. He couldn't see and could barely hear through the shell of coral, but with his empathy he could tell what was happening. Roshi was there and he was enraged. One by one he felt the hunter-nin's lives just being extinguished. After barely a minute, the last one fell. Yagura grit his teeth and stood, allowing the coral to crumble and fall apart. He held out a hand to Naruto and helped him stand, and as he did the acrid stench of burning flesh nearly made Naruto gag. The surrounding area had turned into a molten field of death. Bodies lay half submerged in pools of molten rock and slowly sank as they were melted down. Naruto knew he'd be having nightmares of the sights and sounds of Roshi's work for weeks to come, but he could live with that. He wouldn't begrudge the man how ruthless he had been. He'd kill anyone who threatened his family after all. Roshi walked up to them and gave Yagura a glance over. He appeared to have turned his body itself into magma. His body slowly turned to normal, and the tail behind him slowly sunk back into his flesh. Before it had completely vanished, he stamped his foot and the pools of magma deepened and swallowed the last of their foes' bodies. He clenched his fist and then all of the magma immediately hardened, leaving the 3 of them standing in an obsidian graveyard. Roshi, thank you. Thank you so much. The older man gave him a nod but had a troubled look on his face. This is Yagura. Why didn't you use Kurama's chakra? He was floored as Yagura turned to him with his arms crossed. Both men were very angry and conflicted about how he had acted. Naruto hoped that anger stemmed from concern. It was hard for him to ever tell. Ah well, I didn't want to have to kill them and it was too late for that. Yagura said softly, but not without an edge. Yagura gestured around them. The only chance we had was if you utilized a tail or 2 of chakra. I'm guessing it's still a tad hard for you with your seal, but I'm sure that you two have a close enough connection to not be overwhelmed by 1 or 2 tails. I know you needed help, so I was about to release Kurama. What? What did you say? Naruto flinched back as both Roshi and Yagura's anger spiked, but it was Roshi's cold inquiry that made Naruto uneasy. I was going to. I knew Yagura needed help. Roshi took a few steps towards him and Naruto couldn't help but sink into himself. They were both severely disappointed in him. He looked down and clenched his fists, waiting for a nasty rebuke. He felt a hand rest on his shoulder and peeked through his hair to see Roshi squatting down to look him in the eye. Fight with everything you have, kid. Don't weigh your life as less than ours. Don't ever do that again. You have Kurama's power in you, and should you falter on your own, there is no shame in using his help to fight back. The world is against us already. We will need to fight tooth and nail to survive. Every one of us. Do you hear me? Why, yeah. Yes. Promise me. I want you to promise me that you'll always fight with everything you have. Roshi. He started to say before Yagura squatted down beside Roshi and looked at him sternly. I want to hear that too. It's important that you never give up like you just did. There won't always be someone to swoop in at the last minute to turn the tide. Yes, the odds of me surviving would be higher if you had gone through with your plan. But, the odds of both of us leaving together would have been erased. That's not your choice to make. We can't be worried about you losing hope in the middle of a fight and giving up, or we won't be able to focus. Roshi grunted in agreement. Exactly, kid. You'd become a liability if we had to worry about you turning yourself into a martyr when the going gets tough. Single quote. I think they're right, kid. I think I'm going to have to ask for you to make that promise too. Naruto couldn't help but be overwhelmed by the emotions swirling in the air around him and suffocating him. It all became too much and he began to cry. He felt Yagura pull him into a hug and he clutched onto him despite the embarrassment of acting like such a kid. Roshi didn't join the hug, but he did ruffle his hair. We need to hear it, kid. I promise I'll fight to the very end. No matter what. No matter the odds. I promise. Good. You're turning into a fine shinobi. Roshi stood up and cracked his neck. I came as soon as I figured out where you were. You shouldn't have gone alone. Naruto sniffled and wiped his nose before taking a shaky breath. He chuckled lightly and shook his head. I had to try to save Isobu. Yagura watched them both and took a step back. Naruto could sense that neither Yagura or Roshi knew exactly how to act right now. He himself wasn't so sure either. This was an unprecedented moment. One out of his wildest dreams. Yagura looked around softly. Well then, where should we head to, brothers? Roshi grimaced. Maybe a bit too far for now. Let's stick with comrades. Naruto grinned at them both and then looked around them. By the speed Guy could travel, he'd soon reach Konoha, and Naruto still had quite a journey ahead of him. His memories had never returned from that last clone, so it hadn't popped, and that meant it was still with Guy. He knew that he'd have to get to the village with all haste. Hiruzen would be sorely disappointed and mad, and Naruto didn't want him to worry too much. I have to go back to the village. I need to report in. People there will be worried. Roshi nodded at him, and Naruto was so thankful that the man didn't disagree or distrust him. It seemed that he'd come to trust Naruto, slightly, while he was away. Okay. We could stick together. Maybe we could meet up at one of your spots to regroup. Sure, wanna rendezvous at Tanzaku quarters? Naruto shook his head and stood up slowly. His leg was clearly fractured again. He'd need at least a night before he was good enough to travel. How about the outpost on the northwestern border? The old Uchiha base. Sure, sounds good. How long do you need for your leg? He shrugged and started walking towards the woods. Just a night. Would it be okay if you two stuck around? Sure, kid. Yeah, and you two can tell me how you met. Okay. It's a pretty crazy story. Naruto grinned. Oh, and in the morning I'll make a whole bunch of clones to throw off our trails. I've always wanted to be able to do that. Yagura just chuckled and walked after him while Roshi seemed content to just listen to him ramble. Everything seemed so much brighter. He was going to be able to return home. He'd been gone for so long. Quote. Yes, sir. And then it took us around a week to journey from Mizugakure back here, Hokage-sama. Agent Konoha managed to get by without any major injuries, and we made record time back as instructed. It was a perfect debrief. 2 top-tier shinobi returning valiantly from war. Deposing a tyrant and helping an ally to the helm of a great nation, and thereby inserting a new daimyo into the land of water with direct familial ties to their own daimyo. A perfect outcome. Yet, something was wrong. He didn't have Naruto's empathy, but he knew the boy so closely from having raised him that he could easily tell now when the child was uncomfortable. Like a child hiding a truth from a parent and squirming about it. Of course, in Naruto's case with his empathy, he knew that he was found out now. That the best course was to come clean before he forced him to as both his guardian and his cage. The boy visibly deflated, and Hiruzen couldn't help the grim amusement at just how much Naruto acted like Asuma when he was caught sneaking out or with his hand in the cookie jar. Asuma had never been a perfect child. He had been quite the naughty little child in his youth. Naruto took a step forward and Guy fell silent. The boy turned to face Guy and bowed in apology. I beg for your understanding, Guy-san, for yet another deception. He rose and turned to face Hiruzen, and he couldn't help but wonder what the boy was going to divulge now. C1. Reporting for duty, Hokage-sama. Even as he raised a brow, he instantly noticed Guy gaping in surprise and paling, and knew the revelation wasn't a good one at all. C1. Hi. My name, Hokage-sama. C1. Abbreviation of, Clone 1 foot. Everything started to fall into place and Hiruzen felt worry began to claw its way forward from the back of his mind. If there is more to the debriefing that needs be added, please do so, Agent C1. Yes, Hokage-sama. The clone took a breath and then began to start his own debrief, one he had clearly been preparing for just this moment. Mid-mission it was learned through sources that Yagura had been enslaved by a genjutsu. An opportunity revealed itself to break him of this illusion and extract him for interrogation and possible defection. No one made a sound. Guy looked completely appalled and surprised, and Hiruzen knew he had been fooled just as well. It seemed that Naruto was capable of deceiving even Jonin of the upper echelons. He idly wondered who the boy hadn't fooled yet and watched him flinch as if struck. You acted outside of your mission parameters. Sir. You endangered not just yourself, but your teammate. Not only that, you endanger the village and open us up to retribution from the Mizukage. She doesn't know, and that makes it better. His acrid tone silenced the boy and stopped his response in his throat. Guy, you are dismissed. Guy immediately bowed and exited the room, softly patting the boy's shoulder and quietly closing the door behind him. I am surprised at you, Naruto. I had expected. No, you're not. You're not surprised. Naruto, C1, looked up at him with a scowl on his face and tears in his eyes. He'd never seen the boy look at him with such hurt before. That's why you didn't tell me that Yagura was a Jinchuriki. You were scared that I wouldn't follow orders, that I would abandon everything to save him. He got up from his seat and walked around the desk to the boy. He kneeled down and looked him in the eyes. He spoke sternly but concerned. You are my subordinate, but above that you are my family. I know your dream and I know your heart. You are already a good person, Naruto-kun. I am so proud of you and your growth, and yes, I was scared that knowing the man who the war was aimed at defeating was a Jinchuriki. That you would struggle with the duty of putting him down. I recognize that I should have known you would sense the lie from me. I apologize that I tried to keep it a secret. Understand that I did it to protect you, and that it was important that you didn't try to do exactly what you've done. Naruto sniffled a little and nodded in that way that children do when they're scolded. He was surprised at how much he'd grown in 6 months. He was getting older. He wasn't that 4-year-old joining Team RO on missions anymore. We can continue when you return. What was your return route? I was planning on taking Yagura to the land of fire and then to a safe house. I don't know where I am now. Very well, release and return to him. Thank you for your assistance and understanding, Naruto C1, Either's fine. The boy clone reached out and hugged him tightly. Just as he returned the hug, he felt the clone sob softly once, and then in a puff of smoke he was alone once more. He wasted no time and pulsed his chakra. Within a minute, from deep in the heart of the cage tower, Kakashi came running in his Anbu commander regalia and armor. Naruto hasn't returned. He extracted Yagura and fled to the southern border of the land of fire. I believe them both to be injured, and if any trace was left of Yagura's possible survival, then they are surely being pursued by Mei's forces. Take whoever you wish, discreetly, and bring him back to me. Kakashi spared no time for a snarky response, barely even giving him a nod in understanding before he was gone. This was troublesome, as Shikaku would say. He sat on his desk and sighed deeply as he rubbed his jaw. Please. Let him come back alive. Naruto huffed as he pushed himself forward. He had spent one night with Yagura and Roshi, and in the morning they had split paths. Naruto had created 50 clones that had spent the better part of 2 days making dozens upon dozens of false trails that intersected, backtracked, and were layered with scents and hairs from both him and Yagura all over the forests of the land of fire. A dedicated tracker might be able to map them all out, but it would take time, and every second that it took was another second they had to put some distance between their hunters and towards their destinations. His leg had managed to heal to the point where he wasn't in constant pain, but it was stiff and uncomfortable. He hadn't even managed to push himself to his limits. His speed had nearly been cut by a third. Yet it was his chakra levels that were worrying him. He'd never been this low for this long. He'd always been rather gifted in his chakra pool, thanks not only to his Uzumaki heritage but also Kurama's work on his body's biology. It wasn't infinite though. Once a body had been strained, it took time for it to regenerate back to its capacity. The more strain you put onto a chakra system, the more time it took to generate more chakra. In effect, Naruto was playing a dangerous game in his pursuit to make it home as quickly as possible. He would not be able to fight off a squad of hunter nin in his condition. Even if he used Kurama's chakra, his chakra system was so strained that it could cause permanent damage. Then about a day ago, his clone had popped and C1's memories told him that Hiruzen knew and was disappointed and worried. He had to get home. Things were bad. If he got into a fight, he wouldn't last long. He was swinging through the trees as quickly as he could. He was about to leap to the next tree when his body jerked backwards. Almost as if it moved of his own accord. It had only happened once or twice before. When his empathy detected a threat that he wouldn't be able to process quick enough, so his subconscious took the reins. Just as he finished realizing what must have happened, he watched as the tree he had intended on landing on erupted into blue flames. Shit, he cursed. Before he could even look around, his body threw itself to the side as hard as it could. He slammed into a tree trunk and it felt as if every bump in the bark would be imprinted in his skin, and yet he was terrified to watch another blue fireball detonate on the exact spot he was standing on. Who is out there? He stretched his senses as far as he could and was furious to find nothing. Whoever or whatever was after him knew he was a censor at the very least. They seemed skilled at long-range attacks and seemed content to take pot shots at him. He was being targeted. They knew exactly who he was. They weren't from Kiri either. That was extremely worrisome. Without them entering the range of his empathy, he was blind. He had no idea who they were or even how many traps had been planted and primed in the woods surrounding them. They had grazed the border of his empathy, and that was the only thing that had granted him a heads up to the two fired shots. They must be able to tell that he hadn't been hit by the two initial volley. Which meant more would be coming from farther away. He had to run. He sprinted forwards, and not more than 2 seconds later a blue fireball fell through the canopy and blasted the tree he'd been leaning against apart. He stumbled as the blast threw him forwards, and he scrambled to recover as fast as he could. Fireballs fell from the sky in an increasing frequency that put fear in Naruto's heart. Whoever was doing this had chakra to spare, and they were funneling him towards a kill zone. Any time he tried to double back or make a break from a forward course, a flurry of fireballs impeded his path. Kunai traps, pitfalls, and razor wire webs were also quite the inconvenience, as any opportunity that he gave his opponent would end in his death. Just as he cleared the third pitfall, his body reflexively dove to the right as a figure fell from above with elongated and razor-sharp fingernails aimed for his vital organs. He panted deeply as he rolled into a defensive position, and his eyes quickly took in her appearance. It was a woman, had long blonde hair in a braid, a pale complexion. She exuded confidence and power. She wore a Kumogakure Hitai 8. Then his empathy encompassed her, and he knew. Shit, this is Yugito Kurama. She's Matabe's Jinchuriki. And I don't think she's here to play nice, kid. Run. Naruto flipped over and sprinted away, and Yugito chased after him in fast pursuit. He took to the tree branches, twisting around them, flinging off of them, using each and every trick that the Sandaime had taught him with the monkey claw style. It wasn't enough. Yugito was there at every turn, and her nails were painful reminders of how close he was coming to being killed at every turn. After 5 miles of running, he realized that he was bleeding too much. Every time she had cornered him, she settled for a glancing blow. She knew he was tired. She knew he didn't want to fight. She knew that fleeing was his only choice. She was a natural predator. Playing cat and mouse with him where there was no way he could win. He grit his teeth, and he didn't give up. He'd promised Roshi and Yagura. He wouldn't give up. He ignored his wooziness and the shooting pain as his leg neared breaking once more and kept running. The next time she cornered him, he dove and engaged in hand-to-hand combat, surprising her for a second, and he took his chance. Yugito ni Jinchuriki of the two tails. Hear me out. She didn't even deign to answer him, her claws piercing through air and flesh alike, glittering red in the afternoon sun. I know you were sent. He ducked as her claws tried to gouge out his eyes. To kill me, but I don't want to fight. He flipped backwards as she attempted to cut deep into his throat, but I don't want to fight. I think she heard you the first time, kid. What do I do, Kurama? She's not listening. I don't think she will, kid. She already knew you were my Jinchuriki. She knows exactly who and what you are. The fact that Matabe would ever let her Jinchuriki strike out at one I had chosen, now that is an insult I am going to have to answer in the future once this all calms down. Kurama. She's trying to kill me. Right, hold on kid, we only got one option. Naruto resigned himself in agreement and snarled in frustration. So be it. Her leg sliced through the air to collapse his chest and it was stopped by his clawed hand covered in red chakra. Beneath his mask, his eyes grew slitted and feral, and he began to shed tears as his empathy heightened. You have maybe 20 seconds. Gotta make 'em count. The tempo of the fight suddenly shifted as Naruto pushed her back. He fluidly dodged each strike, each punch, each kick. He effortlessly countered every strike in ways that 5 strikes later left her wide open. Her eyes widened as he struck a kunai up and into her armpit, just missing her heart. She leapt back as blood began to gush down her side and the chakra cloak quickly dissipated around him. His hands sank to his knees and he deeply gasped for breath. Will you please listen? He snarled and shakily stood up. His leg had gone from fractured to broken and his vision was shaking and going in and out. I want to save the Biju, don't you want that? Wouldn't you like for Matabi to be free and safe after you're gone? Why are you fighting me? Yugito frowned at him and he snarled back as her anger spiked. She tore out the kunai and let the wound bleed. She stood up and looked at him and scoffed. You are just a fool who overplayed every hand he'd been dealt. If you waited a decade or two, became the leader of your village, maybe you'd have been able to achieve your dream, but your ambition lead you to this end. I will do as my cage has instructed me, just as you would do as you are told. He roared at her in defiance as a chakra cloak slowly began to grow around her. Her wound quickly stopped bleeding and he could see through the film of demonic chakra that it had been completely healed. That had been his one shot at getting away and he hadn't taken it. He'd made a mistake. She walked towards him, claws outstretched, ready to continue the fight. And he collapsed to the ground. As the chakra exhaustion set in, his body functions shut down. I lost. Yugito paused as the boy collapsed, his mask falling off his face as he landed on his side. He gasped lightly as his body slowly trembled. Chakra exhaustion. She'd never seen a Jinchuriki fall victim to it before. She relaxed and took in a steadying breath. Matabi had fallen silent since the fight began, and while she knew the cat had conflicting feelings about their mission, she had her orders. She withdrew her nails and took out a kunai. It'd be quicker this way. I'm gonna have to ask you to step away from the child. She spun around and stared at 3 konoha shinobi. The center one had spiky, gray hair held back by his headband. He had a mask that covered his lower face and he had lifted up his headband to reveal a Sharingan narrowed in her direction. To either side of him were 2 kunoichi. One had her hair up in a ponytail and was wearing a trench coat. The other was wearing what appeared to be a red-colored blouse of armor with red eyes. The boy had reinforcements. I'm afraid that you are in violation of the treaty between our villages. Stand down and surrender and this will be resolved peacefully. She narrowed her eyes and flexed her hands, releasing her claws. The man scowled at her and almost growled, fine. Then meet the dogs of war. He gave a sharp whistle and from all around them dogs of all things swarmed her. She managed to knock them all back, but one tiny runt grabbed the collar of her target and ran off as fast as it could, dragging him away behind him. She glared from the boy back to the reinforcements and the man took a warning step towards her. Don't. She turned and chased after her target and the 3 shinobi chased after her. It'd take more than that to get her to fail her mission. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.